You've heard of haunted ships, but have you ever heard of the SS Valencia? It's not just a name, it's a legend, a whisper in the dark, a place where the past clings to the waves like seaweed. This ship was once a grand passenger liner, a floating palace for the wealthy, until a terrible storm in 1918 turned it into a graveyard of secrets. The survivors remember the screams, the chaos, and the silence that followed. But what really happened on that fateful night? Did the storm take lives, or did something darker lie beneath the surface? We'll never know the full truth, but the stories refuse to die with the ship. So, I wonder if you were standing on the deck of the SS Valencia, would you feel the weight of history pressing down on you, or would you hear the faintest whisper of the lost, calling from the depths? You ever heard of a ship that vanished with 300 souls on board, and not a single soul ever made it home? That's the story of the SS Valencia, a steamship that sailed from New York to Liverpool in 1918, carrying passengers, cargo, and a secret that would haunt the sea for decades. The Valencia wasn't just any ship. It was a vital link in the war effort, carrying supplies and wounded soldiers across the Atlantic. But it was also carrying something else, the bodies of those who had died in the war and their final journey home. It was a time of grief and resilience, and the Valencia was meant to be a final act of kindness, a ship that would bring the fallen home to their families. But the sea had other plans, and the journey would end in tragedy. On the night of November 24th, 1918, the Valencia vanished without a sound. No distress call, no wreckage, just silence. Some say the ship was sunk by a German U-boat, others say it was a freak accident, but the truth has never been found. What's most haunting is that the Valencia wasn't just a ship, it was a vessel of memory carrying the final wishes of those who had given everything. And now, their story is lost to the sea, like the ship itself. You know how sometimes the sky looks different before a storm? Well, that morning, the air had a strange weight to it, like the world was holding its breath. The sun peeked through the clouds, but it felt more like a warning than a promise. The crew of the SS Valencia had been in high spirits, but there was a hush over the ship that day, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. It wasn't just the weather, something in the air felt off, like a shadow had crept aboard. The water was unnaturally still, almost too still, like it was holding its own breath. The waves didn't crash, they whispered, as if the sea had something to say and wasn't sure how to start. Then came the silence. Not the kind of silence that comes after a storm, but the kind that feels like the world has forgotten to make noise. The crew moved like they were ghosts, as if the ship itself was watching them. And then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the first of the whispers began. Not from the wind, not from the waves, but from the ship itself. A sound like a voice, but not quite a voice, and not from anyone on board. You've heard the names, but now you're standing where the silence screams. The SS Valencia, a ship that never made it to its destination, and the 300 souls it carried, some of them still missing, still waiting to be found. The night of the storm, the waves rose like giants, swallowing the ship whole. No one knew what happened next, only that when the dawn came, the Valencia was gone, and the crew was never seen again. Some say the sea took them, others say they were lost to the storm. But the truth, it's still buried beneath the waves, waiting for the right hands to uncover it. You can feel it, can't you? The weight of their silence, the absence of a story that should have been told. The Valencia was never just a ship, it was a tomb, and its victims are still waiting for their names to be remembered. So, what do you think happened to them? Did the sea take them, or did they vanish into something else entirely? The answer lies beneath the waves waiting for you to find it. I remember the day I met the old sailor from Nova Scotia. He said the sea had a memory, and the SS Valencia was one of its most haunting. He told me about the voices that rose from the waves, the whispers of the drowned. He described the ship as a ghost of steel and salt, caught in a storm that never ended. The men who sailed it, they were never the same after. He said they spoke of a darkness in the hold, something that watched, that waited. There was one woman who claimed she was on the ship that night. She said the Valencia was alive, and it had a voice. She said the voice called to her, and when she answered, she never returned. Her name was Alina, and she never spoke of the night again. The sailors said she vanished like the ship itself, leaving only the sound of her voice in the wind and the memory of a child's laughter on the shore. I wonder if the sea remembers, does it also forget? Or does it keep them close, like a ghost in the heart of the deep, waiting for the right tide to return? The investigation began with a single name, whispered through decades: Margaret. A woman who vanished on the SS Valencia, her fate swallowed by the sea. But the records were incomplete, and the truth seemed to hide like a shadow in the fog. We followed the trail of Margaret's belongings, a locket, a ribbon, a faded postcard with a postmark from the very ship. But every clue led to more questions, and the deeper we dug, the colder the silence became. One night, as we combed through old shipping logs, the wind changed. It picked up a low, mournful sound like a voice calling from the waves. We turned off the lights and listened, waiting for something to happen, and it did. The light flickered. The air grew colder, and for a moment we were certain we saw something, a figure half submerged, reaching toward the shore. But when we looked again, there was nothing. Just the sea and the silence. We left the shore with more questions than answers. The sea doesn't speak, but it remembers. And sometimes it reminds us, through whispers, through relics, through the voices that never fade. You know, the thing that's always bugged me about the SS Valencia is the one detail that just doesn't fit. No one can explain why the ship's logbook was found in pieces, like it was torn apart by something or someone. It's like the ship itself was trying to tell us something it wasn't meant to share. You can almost hear the ink whispering, but it's just silence, and then more silence. And here's the thing, every time someone tries to piece together the story, that one missing detail just slips back into the shadows, like it was never meant to be found at all. Maybe the Valencia wasn't just a ship lost to the sea. Maybe it was a warning, a message left behind by those who didn't make it. And maybe we're still waiting to hear what it has to say. You've heard the tales of the SS Valencia, but what about the stories the locals still tell? Some say the sea remembers the lost, and the wind carries their names in the dunes. In the small coastal town of Point Reyes, they whisper that the ghost of the ship's captain still sails the fog, his lantern glowing like a warning light. Some say the souls of the Valencia's victims still linger, waiting for the right moment to return to the sea, to be reunited with the only place they ever truly belonged. And if you listen closely, especially at midnight, you might hear the sound of waves, not from the sea, but from the shore of the past, calling the lost home. You know, sometimes the worst stories aren't the ones that end. They're the ones that just stop. The SS Valencia's tale is one of those. We followed the wreckage, the whispers, the graves, but what about the ones who never made it to the shore? What if they're still out there, waiting for someone to listen? Every year, the Coast Guard checks the site. Every year, they find nothing. Not a bone, not a name. Just the same empty waves, the same salt-stained rocks. It's like the sea swallowed them whole, and the world forgot to look back. Some say the crew never found the survivors. Others insist the survivors never made it home. And then there are the ones who claim the ship never left port at all. What if the Valencia wasn't a ship, but a grave, and the only thing left to do is keep searching? The mystery isn't just about the past. It's about the people who still carry it, the ones who remember the faces, the voices, the names that slipped through the cracks. Maybe they're not ghosts. Maybe they're just waiting for someone to say, "I remember." So, as we wrap up this tale, let's not forget that some mysteries don't have answers, just echoes. And sometimes the best way to honor the lost is to keep their stories alive, not just in the dark, but in the light of our remembering. You've heard the echoes of the SS Valencia, but have you ever wondered what the sea remembers? Sometimes the quietest waters hold the loudest stories. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't mean peace, it means something's waiting, just out of sight, just out of time. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And if you ever find yourself near the coast, listen closely. Sometimes the waves don't just crash, they whisper. Remember, the sea doesn't forget. Neither do we. You've heard of the old places that hold secrets, places where time stands still, and the past refuses to fade. Dunstan's church isn't just a church, it's a tomb of whispers, a place where the air itself seems to hum with the weight of history. Built in the 12th century, this church has stood through wars, plagues, and centuries of silence. But there's something about its crypts that has always felt wrong. Like the earth itself is holding its breath. The crypts are hidden beneath the church, accessible only through a narrow stone staircase that leads into the dark. Some say the steps are so steep, they feel like you're walking down into the very soul of the earth. But it's not just the stairs or the silence that unsettle you. It's the way the air feels heavier, the way the shadows seem to move when you're not looking. And the sound, sometimes you can hear it just before your eyes adjust. And then there are the stories. The ones that say the crypts are not just a burial ground, but a prison. A place where the dead refuse to stay buried, and the living are never quite the same after they've visited. You've heard the name St. Dunstan's, but did you know it started as a humble chapel for the poor? It was built in the 12th century, a place where the sick and the forgotten were given a second chance, and sometimes a second burial. The original church was small, but its heart was big. It was here that the first recorded burial took place of a young woman named Eliza, who died of the plague. Her grave was simple, but her story wasn't. Some say she was buried with her ring, which vanished the night before her funeral. One of the earliest recorded deaths in the crypt was that of Brother Thomas, a monk who was found in the chapel one morning, his body cold and his face frozen in a look of terror. He had been praying for weeks, and the last words he wrote were, "The grave is not the end." The church saw many more tragedies, from wars to plagues to famines, but the crypt, with its cold stones and whispering walls, seemed to hold the weight of every sorrow. It was here that the first whispers of the cursed crypts began to take shape, and so, the church and its crypt became a place of both faith and fear. The stories grew, the legends deepened, and the whispers that once came from the grave began to echo through the halls of the living. You remember the first time you heard the echo, don't you? That hollow, wet sound bouncing off the stone walls like the church had swallowed a whisper and was trying to spit it back. It wasn't loud, just wrong, like someone had left a glass of water on the altar and the room was trying to tell you it was gone. You told yourself it was just the wind or the echo of your own footsteps, but then you started to wonder if the walls were listening. And that's when you realized this place wasn't just haunted, it was watching you. You ever wonder what happens when a church, built on sacred ground, becomes a tomb for the unworthy? Imagine this, a stormy night, the bell tower shuddering, and a single hollow chime echoing through the darkened nave. Then, the silence breaks. A child's laugh rings out from the back of the church, too clear, too loud, and far too close to the altar where the priest is kneeling in prayer. He tries to move, but the floor gives way beneath him. A trapdoor opens, and the darkness below swallows him whole, leaving only the sound of his own frightened breath echoing in the stillness. Now, decades later, when the church is abandoned, the same bell still chimes on stormy nights, but the laugh is louder, the hand is warmer, and the priest's voice whispers from the depths, "Come find me." I once met a woman who swore she saw a ghost in the crypt, not just a flicker of light, but a figure in white, standing at the foot of the altar. She said it looked like a priest, but it was holding a child's hand. She was there on a Sunday morning, alone, and the church was silent except for the echo of her own breathing. She said the ghost didn't move, just stood there, like it was waiting for something. When she finally escaped, she said she never returned, but she told me she's still haunted by the memory of that child's hand, cold and still, in the dark. If you ever find yourself near St. Dunstan's, listen for the whispers. They're not just echoes of the past, they're messages from those who still live in the stone. We began our investigation with a simple flashlight and a notebook. The first thing we noticed was the faint scent of damp earth, like the church had been sealed for decades. The walls were covered in faded symbols, some resembling ancient prayers, others like warnings. One of them had a red stain, like dried blood, but it wasn't blood, it was rust from a long-forgotten nail. We found a loose brick in the floor that led to a hidden compartment. Inside was a small wooden box, untouched by time, with a single folded letter inside written in a woman's hand. The letter spoke of a secret burial, of a woman who had been buried with her belongings, not her body. The words were careful, almost poetic, as if she had written them to protect herself. We left the crypt with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear, this place had a memory, a story, and maybe even a ghost waiting to be heard. You know, the thing that haunts me most about St. Dunstan's isn't the whispers or the cold. It's the one detail that has never been explained. The one thing that has no name, no record, no explanation. Every time I ask the local historians, they just shrug. They say they've seen the same thing for decades. That it's always been there, always been part of the place. But it's not a painting. It's not a carving. It's something else entirely. I've asked the caretaker, the priest, the town's oldest resident. They all say the same thing. It's been there since the church was built. But when I ask, who built it, they all look away. And that's when I know I've found something that doesn't want to be found. So here's the thing. If you ever find yourself in St. Dunstan's, don't just look for ghosts. Look for the thing that's never been explained. Because sometimes, the most terrifying things are the ones that don't have names yet. You've heard the names, but no one's ever seen the faces. The whispers say the crypt's got a soul, and some say it's the spirit of a priest who cursed the place before he vanished. What if he wasn't the only one who disappeared? Some say the crypt was built on an old pagan burial ground. Others insist the priest who built it was possessed by something older than the church itself. Do you think the land remembers what it's been through? Some say the crypt is a trap, and the only way out is through the heart. Others say it's a mirror, and the only way to escape is to face what you've buried. What do you think the crypt is asking for? The local lore says the crypt is alive, and it's been waiting. Some say it's not a place, it's a person, hiding in plain sight. What if the crypt isn't the thing, it's the one who's been waiting for you? You know, sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones with the loudest whispers, but the ones that keep their secrets buried in silence. And since Dunstan is one of those places, the last priest to serve here left under mysterious circumstances, and no one has been able to step inside since. It's like the church itself has decided to hold its breath. They say the crypt was sealed off after a tragic accident decades ago, one that left a family broken and a church in mourning. But some believe the pain never truly left the stones. And now, with the church in disrepair, the question remains, what's inside that no one dares to find? Or is it the silence that's the real ghost? You've heard the whispers of the crypt, felt the chill of the stone, but have you ever wondered what it's like to stand alone in the silence, with only the echo of footsteps to remind you you're not alone? Sometimes the scariest thing isn't the ghost, it's the feeling that you're being watched, not by eyes, but by something that knows your name. And just like that, the silence breaks, not with a scream, but with a whisper so faint it's almost there, then gone, leaving only the memory of something just out of reach. You can almost hear it now, the echo of a voice you've never met, calling you to stay just a little longer. So, my dear listeners, as we wrap up this tale, I leave you with this. Sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones you see, but the ones that remember you. You've heard of haunted houses, but have you ever heard of a house that doesn't just whisper, but wails? Gaskill House, nestled in the quiet woods of Vermont, has a reputation that's louder than a storm. Built in the 1800s by a wealthy family, Gaskill House was once a place of laughter and grandeur. But something changed after the last family vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and silence. The locals say the house is alive, that it's not just haunted but grieving. They tell of the sound that comes at night, a wail that rises and falls like a lost soul trying to find its way home. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. No one has lived there since the 1950s. The house is now a relic, a place of legend, but if you listen closely, you might hear it whispering, wailing, waiting for someone to come back. You ever heard of a house that whispers? Well, Gaskill House was built in 1742 by a man named Silas Gaskill, a wealthy landowner with a temper as sharp as his pocketbook. He built it to impress, but what he got was a house that would haunt him for years. Silas was known for his iron will and his love of money. He had a wife, Eleanor, and a daughter, Margaret, who was his favorite. But the house, built on land that had a history of strange happenings, seemed to take a liking to Margaret instead. But the house wouldn't let go. Silas tried to burn it down, but the fire died before it could reach the roof. The townsfolk whispered that the house had chosen its next keeper, a woman named Clara, a widow with a past she never spoke of. Clara moved in, expecting to escape the past, but the house had other plans. The walls began to whisper again, and Margaret's voice, now older, called out from the darkness. Clara never left. She was the last to live there, and the last to be heard from. So, you ever wonder why the walls still wail? That's the beginning, but the rest is still waiting to be told. Want to know what happened next? The first sign was a whisper in the hallway, just before the lights flickered. You could feel it in your bones, like the house itself was trying to warn you. Then came the cold spots, like the walls had turned to ice. You could see your breath in the air, even though the windows were open and the night was warm. The floorboards creaked in the middle of the night, not from footsteps, but from something moving beneath them. You couldn't tell if it was the wind or a ghost. The radio would crackle with static, and then play a song you didn't recognize, one that had been buried in the past. It was as if the house had its own playlist of regrets. And then the walls would start to wail, not in words, but in a low, mournful sound that felt like it was coming from the very bones of the house. You couldn't tell if it was the wind, the house, or something that had never left. But one thing was certain, something had been waiting for you. You remember the whispers, don't you? The way they seemed to follow you through the halls, just out of reach. But what if they weren't just the wind? What if they were trying to tell you something? It was late October, and a cold had seeped into the bones of the house. The last of the servants had left, and the silence was too loud, too heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. One morning, they found the master's journal. The last entry was dated the night of the disappearance. It spoke of a presence, a cold hand on his shoulder, and a voice that said, "You were never meant to stay." No one knows what happened to him. Some say he was taken by the house. Others say he simply vanished into the night, leaving only the whispers and the silence behind. And still, the walls weep, not with tears, but with sound. A sound that has never stopped and never will. I've spoken to dozens of people who say they heard the wails at Gaskill House. Some say it's the wind, others say it's the ghost of a woman in a white dress, but one man insists it's the sound of a child crying in the night. He told me he was a teenager when he first heard it, and it stopped him cold. He said the sound was like a child's voice, trembling and desperate, and it came from the walls themselves. One woman said she heard the wails during a storm, and when she looked out the window, she saw a figure in a white dress standing at the edge of the woods, holding something that looked like a child's toy. She didn't see the face, but she said the figure didn't move when she looked directly at it, and when she turned away, the wails stopped, only to start again the next night. And then there was the man who claimed to have seen a child's shadow running down the hallway, even though he was alone in the house. He said it vanished the moment he turned to look. We started with the old blueprints, folded and brittle, like pages from a forgotten diary. The walls of Gaskill House weren't just stone and brick, they were alive with secrets, etched in ink and memory. The team set up a grid of microphones, careful not to disturb the dust that had settled over the centuries. We wanted to hear what the house had been hiding without waking it up. In that cellar, we found a collection of letters, folded and sealed in wax, addressed to a man who had died over a century ago. They spoke of love, of betrayal, and of a place where the walls could speak. The most unsettling thing we found was a diary, written in a woman's hand, describing the same wails and whispers we'd heard. She wrote of a family that vanished, and of a house that remembered. As we left, the house seemed to exhale, the air growing still, the whispers fading into the silence. We didn't know if we'd solved anything, or if we'd only stirred the ghost that had been waiting. You know, there's one thing that's always bugged me about Gaskill House. The one detail that's never been explained. The one thing that just sits there, like a question mark in the attic. The gift. The one thing that's never been found. Some say it was hidden in the walls. Others say it was never there at all. But the thing is, no one ever tried to look for it. Not really. They say the walls of Gaskill House remember. But maybe they don't remember. Maybe they're waiting for something or someone. And you know what's really strange? No one ever asked the right question. Not about the key, not about the sound, not about the silence that followed. So now you're wondering, what if the key wasn't lost? What if it was always in the wrong hands? And what if the walls are just waiting for someone to ask the right question? You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the walls of Gaskill House aren't just old, they're alive, and they're not happy about the way we've treated their people. Some say the wails are the spirit of a young woman, trapped between 2 centuries, still screaming for justice. Others insist it's the sound of the house itself, remembering the blood that once stained its floors. There's even a theory that the house is a prison for the soul of a child who never grew up, and the wails are just it trying to find its way back to the world it was ripped from. But here's the thing, dear listener, no one really knows. The house just keeps whispering, and we keep listening, because sometimes the truth is too heavy to carry alone. You know, sometimes the most haunting things are the ones that never get solved. The wailing walls of Gaskill House still echo with voices we can't quite place, and the mystery remains just as thick as the fog that clings to these old stones. We've scoured the records, spoken with the locals, and even tried to capture the sound on tape, but nothing matches what the residents hear. It's like the house is holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally listen. The police files are full of speculation, but no real answers. Some say it's the ghost of a long-dead child, others insist it's a warning from the past. And then there are those who say it's just the house trying to remember its own pain. You might think, after all this time, the mystery would finally rest. But no, the walls still weep, and the silence is louder than any scream. It's a story that refuses to be closed, just like the house itself. You can almost hear the walls sighing now, as if they've been holding their breath for decades. What do you think they're waiting for, dear? The silence here is thick, like the kind that clings to the back of your neck and refuses to let go. Do you ever feel that? A quiet that knows you're listening. And just like that, the story fades. But the house, it's still waiting. For what? For whom? That's the thing about ghosts, dear. They never really leave. So, what do you say we go on? There's always another tale, another whisper in the dark, waiting just beyond the next door. You've heard the name, but have you ever wondered what it feels like to walk the haunted ground of the Bell Witch? This is a place where time seems to stop and the air is thick with the weight of old secrets. This house, built in the early 1800s, was once home to the Bell family, a quiet, devout household with more than a few strange happenings. The whispers of the past still echo through these halls, as if the spirits are never far away. Some say it was a ghost, others a demon, and still others a vengeful spirit. But one thing is certain, this house has a history that doesn't want to be forgotten. And it's not done with us yet. As you step closer, the air grows colder and the silence is so thick you can almost hear it. This is the place where a family's tragedy turned into a legend and where the past is still waiting to be heard. You know, it all started with a little-known farmer named Richard Lee, who lived on a quiet patch of land in the early 1800s. He was a man of faith, and he had a daughter named Elizabeth who was just a teenager when it all went terribly wrong. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. One night, strange things began to happen in that house. The family heard whispers in the dark, the floorboards creaked without warning, and the doors would slam shut on their own. It was as if something unseen had taken root in their home. Carol's involvement brought attention to the family's plight, and soon, others began to come forward with their own account of the supernatural. But with every news story, the mystery grew darker and the line between truth and legend began to blur. As the legend grew, so did the fear. The family became a cautionary tale, a warning to those who dared to live in the shadows of the unknown. But what they didn't realize was that the curse had only just begun. You know, the first signs were so subtle, you might not have noticed them at all. The house had a way of making things feel off, like the air had a memory of something it shouldn't. The children started acting strangely, talking to themselves, laughing at nothing, and then suddenly crying for no reason. It was like the house had taken hold of their minds. One night, the youngest child awoke screaming, not from a nightmare, but from something that felt like it was inside her. Her voice was too high, too far away, like she wasn't speaking at all. And then, the first real sign, something that no one could ignore. The clock in the parlor stopped at 12:00, and no one could move it. It was as if time itself had been cursed. The house had changed. It wasn't just the people who had been affected, it was the very walls, the very air, as if something had settled in and refused to leave. You remember the night the house itself screamed. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, something that had been waiting. The children were gone, and the house was full of silence that didn't belong. The bell was still ringing, but no one could hear it. It was like the house had taken on a will of its own, and the bell was just the voice of its madness. The family had been warned, but they hadn't listened. Then came the silence. Not the kind that follows a storm, but the kind that crushes the soul. The children never returned, and the family was never the same again. Some say the house still waits for them. You wonder, did they run? Or was it the house that took them? The bell still rings, but now it's just a whisper in the wind, and no one is left to hear it. Some say the first whispers came from a little girl named Annabelle, who would wake in the dead of night, her eyes wide, her voice trembling as she whispered to a shadow that moved behind the attic door. Neighbors claimed they heard her voice, soft and pleading, as if she were calling out to something that had never been there before, but had now become very real. The most chilling accounts came from a farmer who claimed he saw a tall, black-robed figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching the house with eyes that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He said he tried to run, but the figure never moved, only turned its head slightly as if it knew he was there and had always been there. One witness even claimed to see a faint glow coming from the house at night, like a dying fire, and when he approached, the light vanished as if it had never been there. These accounts, though varied, all point to one thing: the presence of something that lingers, unseen, in the silence between the stories. We dug deep, you know. I mean, really deep. The investigators who came after us were like archaeologists, peeling back the layers of time, trying to find the truth buried under decades of superstition and silence. What they found was strange. Not the kind of strange that makes you jump, but the kind that makes you sit up and think, like a riddle wrapped in a mystery, wrapped in a whisper. They also found old testimonies from neighbors who claimed to have seen the witch in the woods or heard her voice at night, but they weren't sure if she was real or just a symbol of something deeper. And then there were the dreams. Some of the investigators reported strange dreams of a woman in a red dress or a voice that whispered their names in the dark. It wasn't just the past they uncovered. It was the present too. The weight of history, the echoes of a family that tried to outrun their own shadow. You know, there's one detail that has always slipped through the cracks. No one can quite explain why the Bell Witch never aged. It's like she was always waiting for someone to find her, but no one ever did. Some say it was the curse itself, that time stood still for her, but others whisper that she was never really a witch at all, just a girl who got lost in a world that never let her go. It's like she was always one step ahead of the world, never quite real, never quite gone. A ghost without a body, a tale without an end. And so, the curse lies on not in a haunted house, but in the silence between the words, in the question that never gets answered. You've heard the tales of the Bell Witch, but what about the folks who still whisper in the dark? Some say the family graveyard holds more secrets than the house itself. There's a local legend that the witch's spirit still haunts the woods at night, watching over the descendants of the original family, testing their courage. Others say the real curse is the loneliness of the family, the way their lives were shaped by fear and isolation, and how that still echoes through the land. And then there are the ones who say the Bell Witch never existed at all, just a story told to scare children, but one that's taken on a life of its own. So, what do you think? Is the Bell Witch a real ghost, or just a tale that's grown too big for the truth to contain? You know, even now, over 2 centuries later, the Bell Witch mystery refuses to let go. It lingers like a shadow on the wall, whispering in the dark. Some say the truth is buried beneath layers of folklore, and that the real story is still waiting to be unearthed, hidden in the silence of the woods. And then there are those who claim the curse is still alive, that the spirits of the past are watching, waiting for the next generation to step into their shadow. So, as you listen, I wonder, what will you choose to believe? That the truth is buried, or that it's just waiting, somewhere, in the silence between the lines? You know, sometimes the worst curses are the ones that don't shout. They whisper in the dark, like the old house on the hill where the Bell Witch once lived. What do you think she's whispering now? It's not the screaming that haunts us, it's the silence that follows. The kind of silence that makes you look over your shoulder, even when you're sure you're alone. So, when you think about the Bell Witch, don't think of a monster. Think of a mother, a daughter, and a love that turned to something far darker than we can ever understand. But the story isn't over, not by a long shot. And if you're listening, you might just be next. You've heard of the Tower of London, but have you ever wondered what it whispers in the dark? It's not just a castle, it's a keeper of secrets, a silent witness to centuries of blood, betrayal, and magic. The tower is more than a fortress, it's a living relic. It has stood for over 900 years, bearing the weight of history, and it's said to guard more than just the crown. Legends say the tower is haunted by the spirits of those who died in its walls, princes, prisoners, and even a few who escaped with their lives, but never their secrets. Some say the tower is protected by unseen guardian spirits that guard its treasures and its truths. Others say it's a place where the living and the dead still share the same air. So, as we step into the heart of this ancient place, let's ask ourselves, what stories does the tower still hold, and who or what is watching from the shadows? You know, the tower wasn't always a place of imprisonment and blood. Back in 1066, it was just a wooden keep, a humble fortress on the edge of a muddy marsh. William the Conqueror saw potential in this spot. He ordered a stone castle built in its place, and the Tower of London was born. It was also where the crown jewels were kept, the glittering treasures of England, locked away in vaults that guarded secrets as valuable as gold. Over the centuries, the tower became a place of both power and peril. It was where the princes in the tower were held, and where the echoes of their fates still linger. And so, the Tower of London became more than just a fortress. It became a symbol of the crown's might and the secrets it kept hidden, even from the sky. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. The air felt heavier, like a weight settled on your chest. You turned your head just enough to glance at the clock, only to realize it wasn't moving at all. The next day, you found your favorite mug in the garden, cold and untouched, yet still in your hand. You looked around, half expecting to see someone laughing, but the garden was silent, save for the wind. One morning, you woke to the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the house. You called out, but no one answered. The laughter stopped as suddenly as it had come, leaving only the silence of an empty room. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Then came the dreams. You'd wake up with the smell of burnt sugar and the feel of a tiny hand in yours. You'd look around, half expecting to see a figure in the corner, but all you'd find was your own reflection staring back at you. And still, you didn't believe it. Not really. You told yourself it was just the house, the way things had always been. But deep down, you knew something had changed, and you weren't sure what or who had moved in. You see it now, the tower's heart where the crown jewels sleep. But beneath that gleam, a darker truth lingers. One night, a woman vanished from the very place where the crown once held power. She was a stewardess, loyal and trusted, working the late-night shift. No one saw her leave. No one heard her call for help. The silence was louder than any scream. The guards swore they heard nothing. The cameras caught nothing. And to this day, no one knows if she was taken or if she simply stepped into the silence and never returned. Her name is lost to time, but her absence lingers. Some say the tower guards her, watching for the next soul who dares to walk where the crown once reigned. And if you're ever here, remember, the crown may be safe, but the silence inside these walls is never quite empty. One of the most persistent accounts comes from a retired watchmaker named Mr. Whitmore, who claims to have seen a woman in a 17th century gown standing at the foot of the White Tower, waiting for someone who never arrived. He said she didn't move, just stared into the distance, and when he approached, she vanished into the shadows like smoke, leaving behind a faint scent of lavender and something else more like sorrow. She said the print was barefoot, and the child's handprint was pressed into the soil beside it, though no child had ever lived in that part of the tower for generations. These stories aren't just about the past, they're echoes of the present, whispers from those who once called this place home, still waiting for a reason to be heard. We followed the trail of whispers through the archives, where yellowed pages told of a strange pattern, mysterious disappearances of servants who had touched the crown jewels. Did they vanish, or did they simply choose to stay hidden? The deeper we dug, the more we found names of women who'd worked in the jewel house, their fates unknown. Some were last seen in the vaults, others in the gardens, but none returned to tell their stories. One evening, we found a locked chest beneath the floorboards of the jewel house. Inside, we discovered a collection of letters written in the hand of a woman who claimed to be a guardian of the crown. She wrote of a duty she could not abandon, no matter the cost. The letters spoke of a silent vigil, of unseen eyes watching over the tower, and of a woman who had taken on the role of protector, her soul bound to the place, her body lost to time. We wondered, was she still here, or had she simply become part of the tower itself? As we left the tower that night, the wind carried a whisper through the ancient stone. It was the first time we heard a voice, not in words, but in a feeling, a presence that had been waiting for us to listen. You've heard the legends, you've seen the ghosts, but there's one thing that has never been explained. A detail so small, so simple, it should have been easy to solve. Yet, it remains a mystery, like the tower itself. It's not the whispers or the footsteps, not the bloodstains or the vanished souls. It's something even the most skeptical historians can't quite put their finger on. A detail that seems too ordinary to be real, yet it haunts them. Some say it's a mark left by a forgotten hand, a message from the past that never made it to the light. Others believe it's a trick of the eye, or worse, a sign that the tower still watches, still waits, still holds its secrets close. No one knows what it means. No one knows why it was left there, and no one knows if it was ever meant to be found. That's the one detail that has never been explained, and maybe that's the point. Some say the stones of the tower hold more than history, they hold the memories of those who never left. Have you ever wondered if the past is still whispering through these walls? Local legends speak of the White Lady, a ghost who haunts the chapel where Henry Roman VII was crowned. But even the locals don't agree on her story. Some say she's a widow, others say she's a witch. And then there's the tower's most elusive guardian, the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the corridors at night. No one knows where it comes from, or if it's real or imagined. These stories aren't just spooky, they're a way to remember the people who shaped this place. Even the stones might be keeping their secrets, just waiting for the right ear to listen. And here we are, still chasing shadows, still wondering if the tower's ghosts are more than just echoes in a stone. The mystery lingers, not because it's solved, but because it's never been fully answered. Some say the missing men were never truly lost, they were taken, and their names are now part of the tower's silent sentry. Others say the tower itself is a living thing, and it has a price. The truth, if it exists at all, is buried beneath layers of history, half-remembered tales, and the weight of centuries. And maybe, just maybe, it's not meant to be found. So we keep coming back, not to solve it, but to feel it, to let the tower remind us that some secrets are better left in the dark, where they belong. You know, sometimes the most unsettling things are the ones that don't make a sound, like the silence between the whispers of the past. And sometimes, the guardians aren't here to scare you. They're here to remind you that history doesn't just end. It watches, and if you ever feel that familiar tug of something unseen, well, you're not alone. We are all just here, listening. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got another story waiting just beyond the next turn. One that's not about ghosts, but about the people who made them. You've heard the stories, but have you ever stood in the shadow of Gaskill House? It's not just a house, it's a memory, a whisper in the wind, a place that holds the weight of a century of secrets. Built in the 1860s, Gaskill House was once a symbol of wealth and refinement. But beneath its grand halls and polished floors, something darker was always waiting in the silence. The locals say it's not the house that haunts, it's the memories it holds. Ghosts of the past trapped in the walls, whispering to those who dare to listen. Some say you can hear them at night, soft, unintelligible voices, a child's laughter, or a woman's sigh echoing through the empty halls like a warning. But what happened here? Why does the house still stand, untouched, as if waiting for someone to uncover the truth hidden within its whispering walls? Come with me, and let's step inside. The story of Gaskill House is just beginning, and the silence is already louder than the truth. You know, the Gaskill house wasn't always a place of whispers. It started as a grand estate, built in the early 1800s by a man named Elias Gaskill, a wealthy businessman with a taste for opulence and a secret for cruelty. He was a man of many dealings, but his true fortune came from a trade that left a stain on his soul. Rumor has it he used to transport slaves through the Underground Railroad, only to sell them back into bondage under the cover of night. But it wasn't just his experiments that made the house infamous. His wife, Margaret, was said to be a woman of sharp mind and sharper tongue. She was the one who kept his secrets, but also the one who knew when to leave. The house was built on land that had been home to a Native American village for generations. Elias, of course, didn't know that, and that's where the real story begins. So, you see, the whispers in the walls may not just be the echoes of a troubled past, but the voices of those who were never truly heard. And that's how it all began, with a man, a wife, a secret, and a house that would never forget. You remember the first time it happened, don't you? That strange creak in the hallway, just before you turned the corner. It wasn't the floorboards, it was something else, something waiting. Then came the whispers. Not loud, not even clear. Just a murmur in the back of your mind, like someone was trying to speak but couldn't get the words out. You told yourself it was just the wind. One night, you woke up to the sound of a child's laughter. It was sweet, innocent until you realized it wasn't coming from anywhere. The walls were laughing, and you were the only one who could hear them. You started to notice things: furniture moved, doors left ajar, and the scent of lavender in the air, even though no one had lit a candle. It was subtle, but it was there, like a ghostly reminder. And then, one morning, you found the note. Not a note from a relative, but one that had been written in the past. You couldn't read it, not really. It was too old, too much like a warning. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. One night, the house didn't just whisper, it screamed. The sounds were so loud, they woke the entire neighborhood, and no one could explain where they came from. The next morning, the caretaker found a small, hand-carved wooden box in the library. Inside was a single locket, engraved with a name that hadn't been seen in the house for over a century. When the police arrived, they found no trace of the woman, no fingerprints, no footprints. Just a door that hadn't been closed, and a silence that had been broken. The house, it seems, had been waiting for someone to finally listen. And now, it's still waiting just like it always has. I spoke to a woman who said she heard the whispers in the dead of night, just as the wind died down and the house went quiet. She said the voices were so clear, they made her turn around and walk straight into the wall. Another man said the house didn't just whisper, it spoke to him. He claimed it told him things about his past he'd long forgotten, and when he tried to leave, the doors locked behind him like they had a will of their own. One of the most chilling accounts came from a caretaker who worked there for decades. He said the walls would hum with a low, steady sound, like the house was breathing, and when he tried to silence it, it only grew louder. There's even a tale from a child who said the house would play music at night. Not radio or records, but something that came from the walls themselves, like the house was remembering a song it hadn't heard in years. And then there's the story of the woman who said she could feel the house watching her. Not with eyes, but with a kind of knowing that made her feel like she was being studied, judged, and remembered. These are just stories. They're echoes, and if you listen closely, you might just hear them too. We started with the basics, you know, checking the locks, the doors, the windows. But the house had a way of making you feel like it was watching you even when you were alone. The first odd thing was the smell, like burnt sugar and something sweetly wrong. It wasn't in the air, it was inside your bones, like the house was whispering through your skin. Then there was the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the halls, but no child was in the house. We all froze, eyes darting, waiting for the next thing to go wrong. One of the investigators found a diary in the attic, written in a shaky hand. It was dated 1923 and told of a girl named Clara who had vanished without a trace. The last entry ended with a question: did I ever leave this house? We found no body, no grave, no record of her ever being missing. But the house had her voice in the walls, and we all knew it was only a matter of time before we heard her again. You see, the one thing they never could explain was the sound. Not a sound like a scream, not a sound like a laugh, just a sound that made the air go still, like the house itself was holding its breath. Some said it was the wind, but the windows were closed. Others said it was the ghost of a child, but no child ever lived here. The only thing they agreed on was that it wasn't coming from anywhere, it was just there. They say the house knows when you're lying, that it doesn't just hear your words, it knows what you're really thinking. And sometimes, it speaks back. So now, when they talk about Gaskill House, they don't talk about the ghost. They talk about the sound, the one that never made sense, and the one that never went away. You've heard the stories, but let me tell you what the locals really whisper. They say the house has a mind of its own, and the walls remember every secret ever spoken inside. Some say the house is cursed by a tragic love affair long ago, and the ghost of the lover still haunts the halls, searching for the one who betrayed her. There's also the theory that the house is a trap, a place where time bends and the lost are lured back, drawn by the sound of their own names in the wind. No one knows for sure, but one thing's certain, the house doesn't just remember. It waits, it listens, and it knows your name. To this day, no one knows what really happened in the Gaskill house. Was it a tragedy, a secret, or something more natural? The truth has been buried, just like the bones. The local historian says the house was abandoned in 1923, but some say the whispers still echo through the halls. Was it a murder, a suicide, or a cover-up? Some say the house is a prison for the past, and the whispers are the voices of those who never found peace. Others say it's just the wind, or the memory of a long-dead family. And so the house remains, a silent witness to time, waiting for someone to listen. Will you be the one to finally hear what it has been trying to say all along? You've heard the whispers now, but they don't stop when the story ends. They linger, like the last note of a lullaby, waiting for someone to listen. Some say the walls remember the lives that passed through them, and sometimes they speak in voices only the lonely can hear. And if you ever find yourself in the right place at the right time, you might just hear them too. But be careful, some whispers are not meant to be answered. Until next time, dear listener, stay warm, stay curious, and may your own walls never speak louder than your heart. You've heard of Holloway Prison, but what about the orphanage that once stood where its walls now stand? Rumors say it was built on a burial ground, and the spirits of the forgotten children still cry for justice. The orphanage was a place of supposed care, but the records say it was more like a factory for broken souls. Children were taken, not protected, and some never left the gates. Some say the orphanage was cursed from the start. Others believe the true horror wasn't the neglect, but the silence, the way the children were never heard at all. If you're brave enough, you might find a key hidden beneath the floorboards of one of the old cells. But don't be surprised if it leads you to more questions than answers. You know, the first thing you need to understand is that Holloway wasn't always a prison. It started as a place for the most vulnerable, the ones society had cast aside, children who had nowhere else to go. It was founded in the 1830s by a man named Thomas Holloway, who claimed he had a vision of a child in the dark, calling for help. He said it was a sign to build a home for the forgotten. The children were brought in from the streets, the workhouses, and sometimes from families too poor to care. Some were sick, some were broken, and some were never seen again. By the 1850s, the orphanage had grown, and with it, rumors. Some said the children were mistreated, others that they were taken away for reform. And then there were the whispers of something darker hiding in the walls. The prison itself came later, in the 1870s, when the state decided to repurpose the site. They called it a reformatory, but the echoes of the past never truly left. And so, Holloway's vision became a place of both hope and horror, a home that turned into a prison, and a prison that still holds its secrets. You might not have noticed it at first, but the air in Holloway Prison had begun to change. A quiet hum, like a distant heartbeat, started to echo through the stone corridors. It wasn't loud, but it was there, just beneath the surface. The staff started to mention in hushed tones how the old building seemed to breathe. A creak here, a groan there, as if the walls themselves were whispering secrets they weren't meant to know. One night, the lights went out completely. No power, no explanation, just darkness. And then, a sound like a child's voice, faint and far away, calling for help. They tried to brush it off as a trick of the mind, but the next day, the staff found a small, crumpled piece of paper on the floor. It had only one word written on it in a child's handwriting: help. It was the first time anyone had seen it, the first time anyone had heard it, and it was only just beginning. You remember the whispers in the halls, how they grew louder as the sun dipped below the horizon. One night, a child vanished. No sound, no trace, just a silence that hung like a shroud. The caretaker found the door ajar, the lock broken. Inside, the room was untouched, as if the child had never been there. But the air was thick with something unseen, something waiting. Neighbors claimed to hear a child's laughter in the night, but when they came to check, there was nothing. Just the wind, and the echo of a voice calling from the dark. The official records say the child was never registered. No name, no birth date, just a missing file, and a silence that never ended. Some say the orphanage took more than it gave, and to this day, on the anniversary of that night, the air grows still. The whispers return, and the doors creak open, as if the child is still waiting to be found. I've spoken to several people who say they saw the orphanage at night, glowing like a sickly lantern. One man claimed he saw a child's hand reaching out from the walls just before the prison gates slammed shut. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Another woman said she heard children laughing, but when she turned, there was no one there, only the sound of old floorboards creaking underfoot, like the ghosts were trying to tell her something. One man, a former guard, swore he saw a child's face in the window, peering at him with wide, unblinking eyes before the glass shattered and the child vanished like smoke. The most unsettling testimony comes from a woman who said she was led by the children to a hidden room, where she found a diary written in a child's hand describing the same events she was now experiencing. She tried to take it, but the moment she touched it, the room went cold, and the children's laughter faded into silence like the diary had been waiting for someone to listen. We started with the old records, and let me tell you, the first thing that struck me was how clean the files were. No names, no dates, just a single line: orphanage closed for lack of funds, 1876. It felt like someone had scrubbed the truth right out of the paper. Then we found the letters, real letters, written by the last caretaker, a woman named Eliza Mather. She spoke of children, yes, but also of a hidden room, a place where the worst ones were kept. I could almost hear her whispering through the paper. The next clue was a child's shoe, buried under the floorboards of what was once the kitchen. It was tiny, worn, and still had a tiny button on the toe. I held it in my hand and felt like I was holding a ghost. Then came the voices, faint but unmistakable. A child's laughter echoing through the empty halls, followed by the sound of a door slamming shut. I told myself it was the wind, but the wind doesn't slam doors. And finally, the scent of sweet, cloying perfume, like lilies and vanilla, but with a hint of something more. It clung to the air like a memory, lingering just long enough to make your heart race. You've heard the whispers of the orphanage, the cries in the night, the cold that clings like a second skin. But there's one thing they never explain: why the door to the nursery still swings open on its own, even when the building's long been sealed. Some say it's the wind, or the weight of the past pressing on the wood. Others say it's the child who never left, still waiting for someone to come find her. But no one's ever been brave enough to step through. Some say the orphanage was built on a battlefield, that the ground is still littered with the bones of those who died there. But the door? That's a mystery that even the most skeptical historians can't solve. You might think, well, it's just a door. But in a place like this, even the simplest things hold secrets. And sometimes, the truth is too heavy to carry. Some say the orphanage ghosts are just the echoes of the children who never made it out. Others whisper that the walls still remember the nurses who vanished without a trace. Local historians think the building was built on the site of an old workhouse, where the poor and the sick were left to die. But the stories say it was worse than that. The town's oldest residents swear they've seen a child's shadow at dusk or heard laughter that fades before they can reach the door. But they never say what the child looks like. Some think the orphanage is a place where the dead still wait for someone to come back and take them home. Others say it's just a building that remembers too well. And so the stories live on, passed from one generation to the next, like a secret they can't quite forget, or maybe never meant to. You know, sometimes the truth is just too heavy to carry, and sometimes the silence that follows is louder than any scream. What do you think really happened there, dear? The records are missing, the files sealed, and the last custodian passed on. It's like the place just forgot to exist. Have you ever felt that? Like something was never meant to be found. Some say the ghosts are still there, waiting for someone to ask the right question. Others say the answers are buried deeper than the earth. And some say the truth is still waiting to be unearthed. And so, the story remains, unresolved, unsolved, and waiting for a voice to finally speak. What do you think, dear? Will someone ever listen? You can almost hear the silence of the place, like it's holding its breath. Sometimes, the most haunted places are the quietest, the ones that don't shout their sorrow. But remember, the ghosts here aren't just stories, they're echoes of real pain, real lives, and real love. They're not asking for scares, they're asking for remembrance. And if you ever find yourself in the quiet hours, somewhere that feels like it's watching you, don't be afraid to listen. Sometimes, the only thing that needs to be heard is the story. Now, let's go somewhere else. Somewhere else where the past still lingers, and the shadows whisper in a language only the brave can understand. You've heard of the sea, but have you heard of the lighthouse? Nestled on the edge of the world, where the ocean meets the sky, it stands like a sentinel of the dark. What secrets does it guard, and why do the locals whisper of things that go bump in the night? This isn't just a building, it's a monument to time, built on the ruins of an ancient abbey. The monks who lived here long ago believed the sea was alive, and they feared its wrath. But what if the sea wasn't the only thing that changed over the centuries? There's a hush that falls over the place at certain times of the year, as if the sea itself is holding its breath. Locals say the lighthouse is haunted not by ghosts, but by something older, something that has been waiting, watching, and listening for centuries. And now, as the sun sets and the light fades, the lighthouse becomes more than a beacon, it becomes a mirror to the past, to the present, and perhaps to the truth that no one dares to speak of. Are you ready to listen? You know, Mont St. Michel isn't just a pretty little island, it's got a history that's as deep as the tide. In the 11th century, the Normans built this place, and it became a powerful fortress and a holy site. But it wasn't all peace and prayers. The abbey that stood there for centuries was a place of both worship and conflict. Monks, nobles, and even kings all had a hand in its construction, and they all left their marks, some sacred, some scandalous. But the lighthouse wasn't built to light the way for sailors, it was built to guard the island, to keep it safe from invaders. And sometimes, that meant locking it away from the world. Over the centuries, the lighthouse saw more than just storms, it saw war, betrayal, and secrets buried beneath the stones. And some of those secrets still whisper in the wind. So, when we talk about the lighthouse today, we're not just talking about a structure. We're talking about a place that holds the weight of history and the echoes of all who walked its halls. You know, sometimes the first sign of something being off isn't a scream or a shadow, it's just the way the wind stops. One evening, the air at Mont St. Michel grew so still, it felt like the world had held its breath. The keepers noticed it too. They'd been there for years, but that night, the lantern didn't flicker. The light stayed steady, as if it had been turned on just for them. The next morning, the sea was gone. Not just calm, but absent. The tide had retreated so far, it left the rocks bare and exposed, as if the ocean had fled for reasons no one could understand. And then the wind came back, not just any wind, but a whispering one, like the sea was trying to speak through the stones. It carried no sound, only a sense that something had been watching, waiting. You ever notice how silence can be the loudest sound? That night, the lighthouse wasn't just quiet, it was listening. You ever notice how the sea whispers secrets to the stones? Well, one night, the tide carried a young woman named Leah to the foot of Mont St. Michel, and she vanished without a sound. No footprints, no cries, just the wind and the waves. The next morning, her mother found her scarf tangled in the seaweed, and her journal open to a page about the lighthouse's strange light left in the sand. No body, no clues, just a chill in the air and a silence that wouldn't be broken. The villagers whispered that the lighthouse had taken her, that it was a place where the sea and sky meet, and where the living can't cross. But no one dared go near it after that. Even the fishermen stayed away. Now, when the wind is right and the light is wrong, you can still see her, just a flicker of white, a whisper of red, and the sound of the sea pulling her back into the dark. Some say the lighthouse keeper's daughter vanished one stormy night. Her last word to whisper of the tide is coming for us. Others insist she was never there at all. A fisherman claimed to see her standing at the base of the cliff, her face pale as moonlight, watching the waves with eyes that never blinked. The journal speaks of a woman in white who appears only when the lighthouse is unlit, her presence felt but never seen, her voice heard in the silence. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 4Ya's Tumblr. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. One witness swore he heard her singing a lullaby, the same one his mother used to hum when he was a child, until the night she disappeared too. No one has seen the lighthouse unlit since, and no one has seen the woman since. We followed the trail of whispers, past the crumbling stone walls and into the heart of the lighthouse. The air was thick with the scent of salt and damp, like the sea had exhaled its secrets right into the chamber. The first thing we found was a ledger, yellowed and brittle, with names and dates scrawled in a hurried hand. It felt like someone had been trying to tell us something too late, too late. We asked the locals, and they spoke in hushed tones about the hollowing, how the lighthouse had once been a place of refuge, but over time, it had begun to take things from the people who stayed too long. The most unsettling find was a journal, hidden behind a loose brick. It was written in a woman's hand, and she had been there years ago. She spoke of dreams that felt real, of voices that called her by name, and of a place that had no end. We left with more questions than answers, but the lighthouse had given us something else too, a feeling like it had been waiting for us to come back, and it wasn't alone. You've heard the stories of the lighthouse, the ghost, the storm, but there's one thing they never explain. Why did the lighthouse keep burning even when the tower was long abandoned? Some say the light was a warning, a beacon for the lost, but others say it was a message, something the tower never meant to send. It wasn't just the light. There was a sound too, a low, rhythmic hum, like the wind but not the wind, like the sea but not the sea. And it never stopped. So what was the lighthouse trying to say? Was it a warning, a plea, or just a ghost with no one left to haunt? And that, my dear, is the one thing that has never been explained. You've heard the tales, but what about the ones that never made it to the books? The locals still whisper about the lighthouse keeper's wife, said to have drowned in the storm she tried to save her husband from. Some say she was cursed for marrying a man who built the lighthouse against the will of the village. Others insist she was just a woman caught between love and duty. There's even a theory that the lighthouse itself is alive, its light a trapped soul, guiding ships to safety and the shore to ruin in equal measure. But what if the real mystery isn't who died there, but why the lighthouse still burns, and who or what still watches from the top? You know, sometimes the most haunting things are the ones we can't quite explain. The lighthouse still stands, but the light inside it has gone dark, and no one knows why. The last keeper vanished without a trace. They left behind a journal, but the pages are blank. Or maybe they're filled with something we can't read. The wind whispers through the cracks like it's trying to tell us. Some say it's the spirit of the keeper, still watching over the sea. Others say it's something older, something that lives in the stones and the salt and the silence between the waves. And still, no one has gone in. No one has dared. The lighthouse has become a symbol of the unknown, of the places that call to us but never let us go. So, what do you think? Is it a ghost? A warning? Or just the sea remembering what it has taken? You've been through the lighthouse's long, winding halls, felt the weight of its silence, and now you're left with a question that lingers like the sea mist. What if the light wasn't meant to guide ships, but to keep something else from escaping? Sometimes, the most terrifying things aren't what they seem. A whisper in the wind, a shadow in the corner of your eye, those are the things that stay with you long after the story's done. And as you walk away from the lighthouse, you might just catch a glimpse of something that doesn't belong, something that's been waiting for you all along. But remember, dear listener, some stories don't end. They just fade into the night, waiting for the right moment to be told again. So, shall we move on to the next tale? Or will you stay a little longer, listening to the quiet, waiting for something to stir? You've heard of the Titanic, but the SS Valencia? That's a name that drifts like a whisper through the fog. A ghost ship of the 1920s, lost in the cold embrace of the Atlantic. You ever feel like the sea holds secrets that won't let go? The Valencia wasn't just a ship, it was a floating palace, all velvet and champagne, full of the rich and the reckless. But the ocean has no use for luxury. You ever wonder what happens when the sea gets jealous of the things we take for granted? The shipwreck was discovered decades later, but the real mystery lies in what came next. The survivors? Some say they were never the same. Others say the sea took more than just the ship. You ever wonder if some places just want to be remembered? Now, the Valencia is more than just a ship, it's a story, a memory, a warning. You ever feel like the sea's just waiting for someone to listen? It's not just the wind that carries the whispers, it's the silence between the waves. You know, the SS Valencia wasn't just any ship, it was a proud, sturdy vessel built for the Atlantic trade. But in 1906, it became a graveyard of dreams. Imagine a steamer, full of passengers, sailing under a gray sky with the faint sound of waves and the scent of salt in the air. On that fateful night, a storm rolled in like a beast from the deep. The crew worked hard to keep the ship afloat, but the sea was relentless. You can almost hear the wind howling through the rigging and feel the tension in the air as the ship groans under the weight of the waves. Among those lost were families, travelers, and a few brave souls who tried to save others. Some were dragged below, others lost in the chaos, and many never made it to shore. The sea took them all, and the world moved on, but the memory of the Valencia lingers, like a ghost in the waves. And so, the story of the Valencia faded into history until the whispers of its past began to rise again. People say that the sea still remembers, and that the souls of those who died are waiting for someone to listen. Are you ready to hear what they have to say? You know how sometimes the sea just stops, like it's holding its breath? That's what happened the morning the SS Valencia left the harbor. The water was calm, the sky a dull gray, and the crew said it felt like the ocean was watching them. The captain said the tide was too low for that time of year. The crew said the compass spun like a drunk man. And the cook? He said he saw a shadow in the water just before the first bodies turned up missing. The crew started to whisper. Some said it was the ghosts of sailors who had drowned before. Others said the sea was punishing them for something. But no one could say for sure what or why. And then, the worst happened. The ship itself began to change. The ropes rotted overnight, the lanterns flickered without wind, and the crews started to vanish one by one, like they'd never been there at all. You can still see the ship today, just off the coast, but the water around it's always still, and the wind never comes near. It's like the sea is waiting for something or someone to come back. You've heard the names, you've felt the pull of the sea, but have you ever wondered what really happened on the night the SS Valencia vanished? The ship was full, the skies were calm, and then nothing. The last message came through a storm, a panicked transmission about a sudden shift in the sea. The crew had no time to react. The ship was caught in a current no one had ever seen before, a silent force that dragged it into the depths. Some say the sea was angry, others say it was a warning. What we do know is that no one survived that night. Not a single lifeboat was found. Not a single body ever made it to shore. And so, the SS Valencia became a ghost in the deep, a tale whispered by sailors who never dared to sail near its resting place. But the sea doesn't forget, and neither do the souls it took. Some say the ship's bell still rings in the fog, a soft, mournful chime that only the drowned can hear. You've heard it, haven't you? That faint echo in the silence. A fisherman from Nova Scotia claimed he saw the ship's lights in the middle of a storm, glowing like lanterns on a ghostly vessel. He said it was too quiet, too still for a ship in the waves. An old sailor from the south claimed he felt the ship's presence in his bones, a cold, humming vibration that started in his spine and spread through his chest like a warning. They say the ship never sank, only vanished. That it waits for the right moment, the right tide, and the right soul to pull it back into the waves. You've felt it, haven't you? That pull in your chest, like something's calling you home. The investigators started with the old records, dusty and brittle, like the ship itself. They found names, dates, and a few cryptic notes about a storm that came out of nowhere. They traced the Valencia's last voyage to a small fishing port, where the locals still whisper about the night the sea swallowed the ship whole. One old sailor, now in his 90s, described a strange light in the sky that night, like fire, but it was the sea that burned with it. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. They found no wreckage, just a single anchor lying in a field, rusted and broken, as if it had been dragged from the depths by something still alive. The deeper they dug, the more the stories grew of voices in the wind, of hands reaching from the waves, of a curse that never left the sea. You know, the one thing that has never been explained is why the Valencia's bell didn't ring that final night. Not a single sound. No warning. Just silence. You ever think about that? What if the bell was the last thing they heard? The bell was supposed to be the ship's heart, its voice echoing through the waves. But that night, it was silent. No one heard it. No one saw it. Just a ship, a storm, and a sudden, unnatural hush. You ever think about the bell? What if it was the last thing they heard? What if it was the last thing they saw? And what if, in the end, the Valencia didn't just sink, it just vanished? That's the one detail that has never been explained. Just silence. And maybe, just maybe, the Valencia's bell is still out there, waiting to be found or waiting to ring again. You've heard the stories, but what about the people who still believe them? There's a widow in town who says she saw a figure in the mist holding the lantern, standing where the Valencia sank. Some say the ship's bell still rings on stormy nights, loud enough to wake the dead. Others claim the water whispers secrets to those who listen closely enough. Theories abound, but no one can say for sure. Was it a ghost, a trick of the light, or something far more sinister? That's what makes the Valencia so haunting. And if you're ever near the coast, listen for the water. Sometimes, the drowned don't want to be forgotten, and they'll make sure you remember. You followed these drowned souls through the wreckage, the wreckage, the wreckage. But the truth, it's still drifting in the dark, like the last echo of a ship's horn. The records are silent, the survivors are gone, and the families still wait for answers. What if the sea never gave up its secrets, and the Valencia never truly sank? Some say the Valencia was never lost, it was taken, by the deep, by time, by the silence that swallows all things. And some say it's still out there, waiting. So what will you do when the story ends, but the mystery remains? Will you follow the last wave, or will you let the sea take its secrets back? You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. The sea doesn't just remember the Valencia, it whispers her name to the moon. And when the wind picks up, you might hear it just a faint, sorrowful hum, like a song half remembered from a long ago life. But don't linger too long. Some stories are best left to the waves. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got another tale to tell, one about a house that never sleeps. You've heard of haunted houses, but have you ever heard of a haunted family? This isn't just a house, it's a legacy of whispers, curses, and a kind of sorrow that lingers long after the last candle is blown out. In the 1800s, a family named Carnton lived here, but their home became a place of fear, a place where the line between the living and the dead blurred so thin, it felt like the devil had taken up residence. The story begins with a young girl named Annie Bell, whose laughter once filled these halls. But her laughter turned to screams, and her family's lives were shattered by the whispers that came from the walls, whispers that would not let them rest. This house is more than haunted, it's cursed. It's a place where grief and guilt took root and where the voices of the past refused to be silenced, even after the last family member left. So, if you're looking for a story that lingers in your mind long after the credits roll, this is the one. This is the place where the ghost of a family's pain still echoes through the walls, waiting for someone to listen. You know, back in the early 1800s, in the heart of the Kentucky hills, there was a family with a name that echoed through the woods like a haunting melody, the Cartwrights. But their legacy was anything but peaceful. The patriarch, John Cartwright, was a man of means, but he had a temper that matched the stormy skies above his home. And his youngest daughter, Elizabeth, was the one who would become the heart of this dark tale. Annabelle spoke in riddles, claimed to hear voices, and soon began to taunt Elizabeth with whispers and strange warnings. The house itself seemed to come alive, echoing with her words and growing colder with each passing day. As the years passed, the whispers turned into accusations, and the rumors turned into something far more sinister. The truth behind Annabelle's presence and Elizabeth's suffering would take generations to uncover. And so, the legend of the Bell Witch began, not with a scream, but with a whisper, a shadow, and a family torn apart by the weight of their own dark history. You remember the first time you noticed something wasn't quite right. It was a quiet Sunday, the house was still, and the air felt like it was holding its breath. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly, like it was trying to drown out something else. You wondered if it was just the old house settling in. One night, you woke to the sound of laughter, real laughter, but it didn't come from the house. It came from the room you hadn't slept in for years. You started to wonder if the house had a mind of its own or if someone else had been here before you and hadn't left. And you began to wonder, not for the first time, if you'd made a mistake in choosing this place. Not for the first time, either. You wished you'd listened to the warnings. You remember the night the whispers stopped. The house was still, the fire low, and the air thick with silence. It was as if the devil himself had taken a breath and held it. The family had gathered, waiting for the next cry, the next scream, the next sign. But nothing came. Not a word, not a sound. Just the silence, heavy and full of something unspoken. They waited, and waited, and then, just as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, the door creaked open. But no one was there. Not the boy, not the mother, not the father. The silence returned, but this time, it was different. It wasn't just silence. It was a presence, a weight, a knowing, and it hadn't left. I remember the first time I heard about the Bell Witch, and it was through a story my grandmother told me by firelight. She said the girl who claimed to be the spirit wasn't just loud, she was a force of nature, like a storm trapped in a body. The accounts say the spirit's voice was so clear, it made people freeze in their tracks. Some claimed they could hear it in the dead of night, whispering secrets they weren't meant to know. Others said it was louder than a thunderstorm, and it never stopped. One of the most unsettling accounts comes from a neighbor who claimed to see the spirit in her own home. She said it stood in the corner of the room, still as stone, watching her every move. Not with malice, but with something that felt like understanding. The testimonies don't all match. Some say the spirit was a child, others a woman, and a few say it was a man in a tattered coat. But one thing they all agree on, the voice was real, the presence was real, and the fear it left behind was something no one could shake. And so, the story lives on, not just in the pages of old journals, but in the whispers that still echo through the hills of the South. Whether it's a ghost, a hoax, or something we've yet to understand, the Bell Witch's voice remains waiting. We followed the trail of ink and whispers to a crumbling old house, where the walls still hummed with the weight of secrets. The air was thick, like the kind you'd find in a forgotten library, and every step felt like treading on something ancient. Inside, we found the diary of the man who claimed to be the witch's lover. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, but the words were sharp as a dagger. He wrote of love, of fear, and of a curse that had no end. We uncovered letters between the witch and the man, filled with promises of protection and warnings of doom. One letter, sealed with a wax stamp, read, "If you break the oath, the earth will swallow you whole." The investigation led us to an old church where the priest once confessed to hearing the witch's voice in the dead of night. He spoke of a curse that had no beginning and no end, only a cycle of pain and fear that would never break. And in the final days of our search, we found a single, untouched lock of hair in a drawer, curled and dark, like it had never been touched by time. It was all we had left of a story that refused to die. You know, the thing that's always bugged me about the Bell Witch case is this one little detail that just never adds up. No one ever explained how that spirit could be so powerful, yet so quiet. It wasn't just a loud, shouting ghost. It was a whisper that cut through the silence, a presence that made the air feel heavy and the walls close in. And yet, no one ever saw it, only felt it. quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dubtith smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. It's like the spirit had a voice, but no body. Or maybe it was the house itself waiting, watching, remembering, and no one ever figured out what it was waiting for. So, what do you think? Was it a ghost, a curse, or something else entirely? The truth is still out there, hiding in the silence, just like it always has. You've heard the tales of the Bell Witch, but have you ever wondered what the locals actually believe? In the quiet of the hills, some say a witch isn't just a ghost, she's a spirit of vengeance, bound to the family for generations. Some whisper that the witch wasn't born in that house, but that she was made there by the blood, the rage, the sorrow. You've heard the names, but what if the real story is just beginning? There's a theory, that the witch is still here, watching, not as a monster, but as a reminder of the past, of the pain, of the legacy that never dies. So next time you hear the whispers in the wind, remember some stories are meant to linger. Some legacies are meant to haunt, and some ghosts are still waiting for their story to be told. Sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts, but the silence that follows. The kind that lingers like a shadow on the wall, whispering that it's still here, just waiting. The records are incomplete, the testimonies conflicting, and the truth buried beneath layers of time and fear. Who was the real victim, and who was just a scapegoat? The most disturbing part? The Bell Witch isn't just a legend. It's still alive in the hearts of those who remember, and in the stories that refuse to fade. So, what do you think? Was it a curse, a cover-up, or something even older, something that has watched us all along? And if you're still listening, I wonder what's your own haunted story? You've walked through the echoes of a legend that haunts more than just a house. It lingers in the silence between the lines of history, in the spaces where truth and myth blur. And as you leave the story behind, you might wonder what if the curse isn't just in the past, but in the way we tell it, the way we remember it, the way we let it live on. So as you head to the next tale, I hope you'll carry this one with you, not just as a story, but as a reminder that some legacies are never truly buried. Stay warm, stay curious, and remember some stories are best told by the fire, with a cup of tea and a heart full of questions. You ever heard of a place where the wind sounds like a choir? Well, Blythburgh Church in Suffolk, England, is said to echo with voices that don't belong to anyone alive. It's a place where the silence is heavier than the stone. Built in the 12th century, this church has stood through centuries of war, plague, and time. But the locals say it's haunted by the souls of children who once lived here, children who never grew old. Now, imagine standing in the nave, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and old candles. The silence is so complete, you can hear your own breath. Then, without warning, the voices begin. The voices are not just whispers, they're clear, full-bodied, and eerily familiar. They sing in harmony, a melody that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It's a sound that lingers long after you've left. And that's when the real mystery begins. Who are these children? Why do they still sing? And why does the church seem to remember them more than the world outside? The story of Blythburgh Church begins not with ghosts, but with a boy named Robert who was just 7 when he vanished without a trace. His father, a local carpenter, was a man of quiet strength, but he couldn't find his son in the woods behind the church, not even a single boot print. Now, they say Robert was the last boy to be seen near the church, and that he vanished into the echo of those voices. Some say he was taken by the choir, others say he was just lost in the song. The mystery of Robert's disappearance has haunted the church for centuries, and now, every time you hear the choirs sing, you might just hear his voice in the echo. You know how sometimes the air feels different, like it's holding its breath? That's what it was like in Blythburgh, the kind of stillness that makes you glance over your shoulder, just to make sure you're not alone. The first real clue came in the form of a whisper, not from the wind, not from the pews, but from the walls themselves. A sound so soft, it felt like the church was breathing. Then came the cold, not the kind that seeps through your bones, but the kind that lingers in the air, like it's been there for years. You could feel it even when the windows were closed. And the music. Oh, the music. It started as a faint hum, like the church itself was trying to remember a hymn. Then it grew, until it filled the air like a ghostly choir, singing in a language none of us could understand. You can't explain it. Not really. It's not the kind of cold that comes from the outside. It's the kind that lives inside the walls, in the stones, in silence between the notes of that eerie choir. Sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest secrets. Blythburgh Church, with its stone walls and ancient pews, has always been a place where silence feels like a living thing. In the spring of 1912, a young choir boy named Thomas disappeared without a sound. His mother found his scarf in the crypt, but no trace of him. The village whispered of ghosts, but no one would say what they'd seen. The villagers claimed Thomas had been lured by the sound of a choir in the crypt, a choir that sang without voices. They said the music was too perfect, too haunting, too much like the way he used to sing in the choir. No one ever found Thomas, but the church still rings with a sound that can't be explained. Some say it's just the wind, but others swear they hear the boy's voice, a soft, trembling echo in the silence. I've spoken to several locals who swear they've heard the choir at night, but never seen a soul. One woman said it sounded like a child's voice, sweet and clear, calling her name from the stone walls. Another man, a retired teacher, claims he once saw a figure in the choir loft, dressed in 19th century robes, singing without moving. He said the figure vanished when he turned to look. The most unsettling story comes from a young couple who said they were followed by a child's laughter through the church halls. They found no one, but the laughter never stopped until they left. It's not just the sounds, though. Some say the air feels heavier in the church at night, and the scent of damp stone and old parchment lingers like a ghost's breath. And then there's the priest who, for years, would wake in the night to the sound of a child's voice singing the same hymn. He never told anyone, but he said it stopped the day he left the parish. We began our investigation at dawn, when the air was still and the church seemed to hold its breath. The silence was thick, like the weight of a secret waiting to be spoken. The first clue came in the form of a faded diary entry, scrawled in an old hand. It spoke of a voice that sang in the dark, not of this world, but of the one beneath. It felt like a whisper in the back of my mind. One of the volunteers reported hearing a faint, childlike voice just before the bells rang. It wasn't loud, but it was there, a soft, lingering note that felt like it was coming from the walls themselves. The final discovery came in the crypt, where a small, child-sized coffin was found, untouched by time. The inscription read, "For the song that never ended." It felt like the church was holding its breath, waiting for a song that would never come. You ever notice how some places hold a secret so deep, it's like they're whispering it to you in the dark? Blythburgh Church has one detail that's just missing. No one can explain it, and no one wants to. It's not the ghosts or the whispers, it's something smaller, something you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. Like a note left behind, or a name that doesn't belong. Some say it's a missing priest, others say it's a child who never left. But no one knows for sure, and that's what makes it so unsettling. You think you've heard every ghost story in England, but Blythburgh, it has one more secret waiting for the right person to listen. You've heard the stories, but what do the locals really think? Some say the choir isn't just singing its morning. Others insist the voices are a trick of the wind or the echo of a long-forgotten mass. Some older folks say the choir only appears on the anniversary of the last bell's fall. Others swear they heard the voices themselves, though they never could find the source. The church has stood for centuries, but the choir is new, only a few decades old. Some say it's the spirits of the children who died in the plague, or the ghosts of the priests who once cursed the place. Still others believe it's just the wind, or the memory of a choir that once filled these halls. But if you listen closely, you can hear something else, something that doesn't belong to this world. And so the legend lies on, not in fear, but in wonder. A reminder that even in the oldest places, the past never truly leaves. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You might think the mystery is buried with the children, but some things refuse to stay quiet. The bells still ring at dusk, and the wind whispers through the stones like a child's lullaby. Every year on the anniversary, the village gathers, not for celebration, but for the ritual of silence. They light a candle, and wait, just wait for the answer to come. The local historian, a woman with silver hair and a voice like dry leaves, says the children were never found. Their names are carved into the pews, but their bodies, well, they've never been found. The police closed the case decades ago, but the church has never let go. And now, the bells ring again. You wonder, do they ring for the children, or for the ones who still listen? You think you've heard all the whispers of Blythburgh, but sometimes the silence speaks louder. What if the choir isn't singing at all? What if it's just waiting? The stones here remember more than they should. You can almost feel them holding their breath, like they're holding onto something they can't quite let go of. Sometimes, the most terrifying thing isn't what you see, it's what you feel. The cold, the weight, the sense that you're not alone in the dark. And when you leave, you wonder if you were ever really there at all, or if you just walked through a door that didn't open. You've heard of haunted places, but have you ever heard of a place that whispers? Tewkesbury Abbey isn't just a ruin, it's a memory, a place where time feels heavy and the silence is full of stories. Built in the 12th century, this abbey once echoed with the sounds of prayer and the footsteps of monks. Now, it's silent, but some say the wind carries voices that were never meant to be heard again. Local legends say the abbey was the site of a tragic betrayal. The Duke of York and his wife were betrayed by their own court, and their bodies were hidden beneath these very stones. Some say their spirits still walk these halls. Even today, the wind carries whispers through the trees. Some say they're the voices of the betrayed, calling out from the shadows. Others say it's just the wind. But if you listen closely, you might hear something else entirely. This place is more than ruin. It's a memory, a warning, a place where history lingers like a shadow. And if you're ever curious to know what happens when the past refuses to stay buried, you might find yourself listening for something you weren't meant to hear. Back in the 12th century, Tewkesbury Abbey was a place of peace and prayer, but it also held a dark secret. The monks here were known for their quiet piety, but they were also accused of strange rituals and secret dealings with the devil. One of the abbey's most infamous figures was Abbot Walter, a man who claimed to have seen the devil in his dreams. He said the abbey was cursed, and that the devil had promised him power if he would keep his mouth shut. The abbey became a place of whispered fear, where the devil's whispers were said to echo through the halls. Some claimed to hear the sound of a child's voice calling for help, but no one dared to investigate. As time passed, the abbey fell into ruin and the whispers grew louder. Some say the devil still walks those woods, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. You remember the first time you heard it, didn't you? A soft, almost musical hum, like a child's lullaby, just before the wind picked up and the trees started to murmur. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent, like someone was trying to get your attention through the leaves, through the bark, through the very air itself. Then came the cold, not the kind that nips at your nose, but a deep, bone-chilling cold that seeped into your bones, even when the sun was high. It was like the woods had turned against you, and the deeper you walked, the more the silence grew. Like the trees were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. You've heard the rumors, haven't you? That in the heart of the woods, just beyond the abbey walls, something watches. Something waits. And it's not just the wind that whispers through the trees. One autumn, a young woman named Alina ventured into the woods to gather herbs. She said she'd be back by sundown, but the last anyone saw her was when she vanished into the mist, her basket still in hand. They found her boots a few days later by the edge of a stream, but no body, no trace of her. Only the sound of her voice, carried on the wind, echoing through the trees like a lullaby gone wrong. The villagers say she was taken by the forest itself, by something that knows her name. They say she's still there, in the trees, singing to the ones who listen. But no one ever finds her again. So when you hear the whispering, don't follow it. Some things are better left in the dark. Some stories aren't meant to be told, especially not to the ones who have already heard them. I've heard from a few locals that the woods don't just whisper, they hum. One woman said she heard it at dusk, like a low, mournful tune coming from the trees, and when she looked, the branches seemed to sway as if someone were dancing in the dark. Another man claimed he saw a woman in a 19th century dress standing by the old mill, her face pale as a ghost, eyes fixed on the river. He said she didn't move when he approached, just stood there, humming a tune he couldn't place. Some say the whispers are the voices of those who were never buried, still waiting for closure. Others think they're the memories of the abbey itself, trying to tell a story that time has tried to silence. One thing is certain, the woods don't just hold secrets, they hold people. And sometimes, the only way to understand them is to listen. We began our investigation with a simple walk through the woods just to get a sense of the place. It was quiet, too quiet, like the trees were holding their breath. As we walked, we noticed something odd, old footprints in the mud, but no one had been there recently. It felt like we were walking through a memory, not a place. We found an old stone marker, barely visible beneath the underbrush. It read, "Here lies the last of the Tewkesbury family." The name was unfamiliar, but the feeling was unmistakable. Something ancient was waiting. As we stood there, the wind picked up, and we heard it, just a whisper, but not from the trees. It sounded like a voice, low and trembling, calling our names. We froze, heart pounding, not sure if it was the wind or something else. The woods had a secret, and we were just beginning to understand how deep it ran. You see it now, don't you? That one detail, the one that just doesn't fit. The way the trees seem to lean toward the abbey, like they're listening. No one can say for sure why the stones of the abbey are so cold to the touch, even in summer. They feel like they've been waiting for something or someone. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered why the abbey never lets go of its secrets? Why do woods guard its past so fiercely? That's the thing, isn't it? The one detail that has never been explained. And maybe that's the real mystery of all of it. You've heard the stories, but let me tell you what the locals still whisper. They say the woods have a memory, and some nights the trees seem to lean in closer, like they're listening. Some say the abbey's last monk, Brother Elias, never left. He was found with his hands clasped in prayer, but his eyes were open, and they say he was looking straight at the woods. One old woman told me she once heard the woods singing at dusk. She said it was a melody that made her bones ache, like the abbey was trying to tell her something it couldn't say aloud. And then there are the children. They say the woods are full of eyes, and if you're not careful, you might not come back the same person you left. So, what do you think? Are we just hearing echoes, or are we listening to something that wants to be heard? There are some questions that time cannot answer, and some shadows that refuse to fade. Even now, decades later, the woods still hold their breath, waiting for someone to listen. The local historian says the boy never returned, and the girl never left. But what if the truth is something more complicated? What if the woods are just trying to tell us a different story? Sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones that never end. They sit in the corners of our minds, whispering, waiting for the right person to hear them. And so, the woods remain, not as a place of fear, but of wonder, of mystery, of the kind of silence that speaks louder than any scream. Perhaps the real mystery isn't what happened in the woods. Maybe it's why we still feel the need to look. As the last embers of the fire fade, I can't help but wonder what whispers are still echoing in the woods today. Are they just the wind, or something more? Sometimes, the most unsettling silence is the one that follows a story. What do you think is listening now, in the quiet? I do hope you've enjoyed the company of these ghosts as much as I have. But don't be surprised if you hear something in the night. Before we move on, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. And if you ever feel the woods calling, remember, I'm always here to answer. You've heard of haunted houses, but have you ever heard of a house that wails? Gaskell House isn't just spooky, it's got a voice, and it's been heard for over a century. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Set in the heart of New England, this house sits on a lonely hill, surrounded by fields that whisper secrets. It's a place where time seems to pause, and the air feels heavier than usual. Local legends say the house is haunted by the spirit of a woman who died in the 1800s. Her cries are said to echo through the walls, especially during the dead of night. Visitors claim to hear the wailing, sometimes a low moan, other times a full-blown scream. It's said that the sound is so real, it can make even the strongest heart race. The house is more than just a place, it's a character in its own right, with a history as dark and layered as the stories that surround it. You know, the Gaskell House wasn't always a place of wails and whispers. Back in the 1800s, it was a grand estate, a place where wealth and ambition danced like fireflies in the dark. The original owner, a man named Samuel Gaskell, was a man of vision and, some say, of ill temper. He built this house with his own hands, and with a heart full of pride, or perhaps pride full of something else. But the house, as they say, has a way of remembering, and remember it did of Samuel's secret dealings, of Alina's silent defiance, and of the child who never left the nursery. It was in that nursery, beneath the floorboards, that the first whispers began. The child's laughter, the mother's cries, and the father's rage. Something old and restless stirred in the walls. And so, the Gaskell House became more than a home, it became a prison, a place where the past refused to stay buried, and where the walls began to speak in a language only the lost could understand. You remember the first time you heard it, didn't you? A low, almost musical moan, like the wind had learned to sing through the cracks in the old stone walls. It was just after supper, the house quiet, the fire low, and the air thick with the smell of damp wood and old memories. You thought it was the wind, but then you heard it again. You told yourself it was just the wind, but then you heard it again this time. It was coming from the bedroom, a sound like a child's cry, or a woman's whisper, just before she was silenced. That night, you couldn't sleep. Every creak in the floorboards, every distant whisper in the hall, felt like a warning. And you knew, deep down, something in the house had been waiting for you. You know, some disappearances don't just vanish, they vanish with a whisper. The last time someone heard from Clara Wren was the night she left her own home, wearing her favorite blue dress, and never came back. Neighbors say she went to the woods behind the house, but no one saw her. Just the sound of her laughter echoing through the trees, and then silence. A silence that's been echoing for decades. They found her shoe, still tucked under the porch, like she'd stopped to tie her lace and then just stopped. No struggle, no sign of a fight. Just a shoe, and a silence that's never been broken. And in the years since, the house has been known to whisper her name. A low, mournful sound, like a child crying, echoing through the walls when no one's around. It's the only sound they ever hear from Gaskell House. I've spoken to dozens of locals, and every single one of them recalls the same thing. A low, mournful wail that seems to echo from the walls themselves. It's not just a sound, it's a presence. One man, a retired teacher, said he heard it every night for 3 years after moving in. He told me it wasn't a scream, it was a voice asking for help, but no one was there to answer. The most chilling testimony came from a young couple who stayed overnight. They said the walls began to hum just before midnight, and the sound grew louder until it felt like the house was breathing. One woman, who's lived nearby her whole life, told me the wail was the sound of a child crying, but not from this world. She said, "It's been there all along. You just have to listen." Even the local sheriff said he's heard it, though he calls it the house's memory. He said, "It's not a ghost, it's a warning. And sometimes the house remembers what people forget." We started by checking the old records, the ones tucked away in the town hall like forgotten ghosts. The first thing we found was a list of names, some familiar, some not, but all tied to that house in some way. One name stood out, though: Margaret Henshaw. She'd been the housekeeper in the 1930s and the last person to leave the house before it was abandoned. She'd vanished without a trace, and no one ever found her body. Then we found a journal, a notebook filled with scribbles, half legible, and full of strange, repetitive phrases. "The walls are speaking," it said. "They remember everything." We also discovered a map of the house, annotated with symbols and markings that didn't match any known architectural plans. It looked like a puzzle, and we were just beginning to piece it together. By the end of the day, we had more questions than answers, and a growing sense that we were standing on the edge of something far older than any of us expected. You've heard the whispers, you felt the chill, but there's one thing that's always left you wondering: why does the wail only happen at midnight, and never during the day? What's the difference between a ghost and a warning? The house has stood for centuries, but no one can say for sure what it was built on. Some say it's on sacred ground, others say it's built over a mass grave, but no one knows why the wail only comes at the hour of the wolf. You might think it's just an old house with a bad plumbing system, but the locals all know better. They say the wail is a message, a plea, a warning from someone who's been trapped for far too long. And that's the thing: no one has ever figured it out. No one has ever seen it. No one has ever stopped the wail. It just keeps coming. Every night, every year, a reminder that some stories are never meant to be solved, only remembered. Some folks say the walls of Gaskill House don't just echo, they sing. A low, mournful wail, like a woman in distress, that drifts through the halls when the wind is just right. There's a theory that the sound comes from the bones of the house itself, the creak of old timber, the settling of stone, but others swear it's something more personal. Others think it's the ghost of a love triangle, a story of betrayal and jealousy that played out in the very rooms where the wails now echo. And then there are those who insist it's just a trick of the mind, a sound that only the most sensitive ears can hear, like a lullaby from a long-gone time. But if you're ever in the area, I'd say listen closely. Sometimes the walls don't just whisper, sometimes they wail. And yet, for all the tales we've heard, the truth remains just out of reach. No one's ever found the body, no one's ever seen the ghost, and no one's ever solved the mystery of why she was there in the first place. Some say it was a lover's farewell, others whisper it was a crime of passion. But even if we knew the motive, we still wouldn't know the full story, because the past has a way of keeping its secrets. You might wonder, what's the point of telling a story that ends with no answers? Well, the point is this: some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They're meant to linger, to remind us that even in the quietest corners of the world, the past can still reach out. And so, the walls still wail, the house still waits. And for now, the story remains just that, a story, waiting for someone to listen. You ever notice how the silence between the wails is just as heavy as the wails themselves? Sometimes, the quiet speaks louder than any scream. I wonder what the walls remember, what secrets they've held for centuries, and what they're trying to tell us now. Some say the walls are just trying to protect the house from the past, and maybe the past is trying to protect us. But I'll tell you this: when you hear the wails, listen close. They might be calling for something or someone. You've heard of the Holocaust, but have you ever stood where the echoes of a million souls still linger? This is Auschwitz-Birkenau, where the air holds more than just the scent of earth and rust, it carries the weight of history. It's not just a place, it's a memory. The ground here is more than stone, it's the final resting place of countless lives, each step you take brushing against the silence of those who never walked away. Some say you can hear the whispers of the past if you listen closely. Not words, but the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers trapped in the soil beneath your feet. This isn't a place of horror for the sake of fear, it's a place where the silence is louder than any scream. And the story here isn't just about suffering, it's about the lives that were lost and the memory that refuses to fade. So, as we step forward, let's remember that this is not just a place of ghosts, it's a place of remembrance. And every step we take is a tribute to those who never got to walk away. Quick word from our sponsor: if this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You ever wonder how something so monstrous could start? It began with a promise, a plan wrapped in the language of progress. A place meant for order and efficiency, but it was built on a foundation of lies. The Nazis thought they could control the chaos of war by turning people into numbers. They called it resettlement. But behind that word was a machine that didn't just move people, it destroyed them. They didn't just build a camp, they built a system. A system that turned mothers into mothers of death and fathers into fathers of despair. Every step they took was a step toward the unimaginable. And in the heart of it all, there were people, some who tried to stop it, some who tried to survive it, and some who were lost to it. The history isn't just about the buildings. It's about the people who walked these steps and the lives that were erased. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. It was just a few steps, but the air felt heavier, like the ground itself was holding its breath. There was a smell, too, not the kind you notice, but the kind that clings to your lungs and stays with you, like the memory of a nightmare. You thought it was just the silence, but then you realized the silence was too loud, like the absence of something that should have been there. You started to notice the faces in the dust, the ghosts of people who had walked these steps before you, and who never left. And then, you realized you were no longer alone. The steps were watching you, waiting for you to step back or to keep going. You ever wonder what it feels like to walk where the world ended? These steps, worn smooth by time and tragedy, once echoed with the cries of the lost. They're not just stones, they're the last whisper of a world that no longer exists. Each footfall here is a memory. The air is heavy, not with sound, but with the weight of silence. You can almost hear the breath of the past, lingering in the stillness. And then, there was silence. Not the kind you can break with a shout, but the kind that wraps around you like a shroud. You stand there, and you wonder, did they ever find their way back? Or were they lost forever? This place remembers, and it won't let you forget. You can't walk away without carrying something of it. A weight, a question, a story that refuses to be buried. I remember the first time I read about those steps. They were described as smooth, worn by time, but somehow still cold. You can almost feel the weight of history pressing down on them. One survivor told me they could hear the sound of footsteps long after the others had vanished. It was like the ground itself was remembering what had happened there. Some claimed the steps were so slick with blood that the prisoners could not climb them without slipping. It was a cruel, calculated punishment for those who dared to resist. In the darkest moments, the steps became a symbol of both hope and despair. They were the only way out, but also the path to the unknown. Even now, the steps seem to whisper to those who listen. They carry the voices of the lost, the cries of the forgotten, and the weight of a world that once turned its back. We followed the trail of blood, not just in the soil, but in the silence. The guards had long left, but something lingered, like a whisper in the wind. The investigators found no bodies, but they found something else: footprints, fresh, in the mud, leading deeper into the camp. The footprints weren't just in the mud, they were in the walls, etched into the stone, as if the earth itself remembered. And then they found the name, carved into a wooden beam, barely visible, worn by time and hands that had not stopped moving. It was a name from the archives, a survivor who had never spoken of the camp, but who had once said, "I walked those steps and never looked back." You ever notice how some details just linger? Like the one thing about Auschwitz-Birkenau that no one ever really explains. You know the one. It's not the smoke, or the screams, or the ashes. It's something quieter, something that doesn't fit the story, like a missing piece in a puzzle that's already been solved. They say the earth remembers, but what if it's not the earth that remembers? What if it's the silence? The silence that never gets explained. And you know what's really strange? No one ever asks about it, like it's not worth knowing. Or maybe it's better not to know. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the locals say? The ones who grew up near the camp, who still walk those same paths with their eyes on the ground. Some say the wind carries voices, not from the past, but from the present, like the camp is still alive, watching, waiting for the next soul to wander too close. There are whispers of a hidden path, a trail that only the lost can find. Some say it leads to a place where the dead still gather, waiting for the world to remember them. But not all stories are meant to be told. Some are meant to be felt, to be carried in silence, like the weight of history that never leaves the land. And if you're ever in the area, listen closely. Sometimes the wind doesn't just carry words, it carries warnings. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the screams or the shadows, but the silence that follows. The silence that lingers where the truth should be. There are stories that never make it into the official records, whispers that fade into the wind, and names that are never spoken aloud. What happened to those who disappeared in the night? We ask ourselves, what if the truth isn't just in the archives? What if it's hidden in the soil, beneath the stones, waiting for someone to listen? And so, we return again and again to this place, not just as visitors, but as seekers, hoping that somewhere in the silence, the truth will finally speak. As the sun dips below the horizon, the world feels lighter, but the weight of history lingers. You can almost hear the silence of 1,000 souls waiting for the next story. Sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't told with screams but with silence. Like the wind that whispers through the trees, carrying the memory of those who were never heard. So, as we turn the page, let's not forget that some stories are meant to haunt us, not to scare, but to remember. To honor those who never had a chance to be heard. And now, as we step into the next tale, let's carry this quiet weight with us. Because some stories are too important to be forgotten, and some ghosts are too real to ignore. You've heard the names of places that haunt the world, but few carry the weight of Auschwitz-Birkenau. It's not just a place, it's a memory, a scar on history, a whisper of the unimaginable. This is where the Nazis turned their nightmares into reality. It's not a place you visit for a vacation, but for reflection, for truth, for the stories that refuse to fade. Now, as you walk through these steps, you're not just walking on stone. You're walking on the bones of the past, where every footfall seems to echo with the voices of those who were never meant to be heard. The air here is thick with something you can't see, but you can feel. It's not the chill of the morning, but the chill of a truth that refuses to be forgotten. And as you take your first step into this place, you're not just entering a memorial. You're stepping into a story that's still being told, still being remembered, still being honored. You know, the first steps into Auschwitz were not meant for the prisoners. They were built for something else entirely, for something far more brutal. The Nazis had a plan, and these steps were just the beginning of it all. Back in 1940, the place was called a camp, but it wasn't for workers. It was for people who were taken, not invited. The SS officers moved in with the same confidence as if they were walking into a business meeting, not a crime scene. The Nazis didn't just build this place, they built a machine. A machine that processed people like cattle, with no mercy, no hesitation, and no regard for human life. These steps were the first rung of the ladder to hell. And yet, for all its brutality, this place was not built in a day. It was the result of years of planning, of ideology, of a belief that some lives were worth less than others. The steps were just the beginning of a journey no one should ever take. So now, as you stand here looking at these steps, you might ask yourself, what did they mean to the people who walked them? And what do they mean to us now, as we remember? You've heard the stories about Auschwitz-Birkenau, but you've never really imagined what it looked like. You picture barbed wire and smoke, but you haven't thought about the way the air felt, the way the ground was still warm from the bodies beneath it. It was the morning of April 27, 1940, and the first train pulled in. You could see the passengers looking out the windows, trying to make sense of the world they were being dragged into. You wonder if they ever thought they'd be walking on the ground that would one day be stained with blood. You can feel the tension in the air, the way the silence between the steps seemed heavier than the silence in your own home. You wonder, what was it like to walk on these steps, knowing that each step could mean the end of everything? There's a kind of quiet horror in the way the ground feels beneath your feet, like it remembers every footstep, every whisper, every scream. You wonder if the earth itself is still waiting for someone to walk on it again. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You can almost hear the voices, the whispers, the cries that once echoed through these halls. You wonder if they're still there, just waiting for someone to listen, to remember, to hear the truth in the silence. You know, sometimes the most terrible things happen in the quietest places. Imagine, if you will, a long, dusty corridor in the heart of the camp, where the air is thick with silence and the weight of history. In this place, prisoners were stripped of their names, their dignity, and their humanity. It was here that the Nazis prepared the most brutal of their crimes, under the guise of order and efficiency. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. The corridor became a symbol of the unseen violence that took place behind closed doors, where fear was the only currency. To this day, the corridor remains a place of haunting memory, where the weight of history presses down on every step, and the air feels like it holds the breath of those who never left. It's hard to say what exactly happened in that corridor, but the silence says everything. And in a place like this, silence is the loudest sound of all. I remember the way the air felt that day, heavy with the weight of something unspoken. A woman stood in the middle of the courtyard, her hands trembling, her eyes locked on the ground. She was the last one to leave the gas chamber. She didn't speak, just stood there, like the world had stopped around her. You can almost hear the silence, the kind that wraps around you like a shroud, and makes you feel the weight of every breath that came before. There's a story, whispered in the archives, of a prisoner who tried to write a letter before being sent to the crematorium. He was found later, clutching the paper like a lifeline, ink still fresh, but the words never made it to the page. They say the camp was built on the bones of the earth, but some believe it was built on the bones of the living. that the very ground remembers, and the wind carries the voices of those who never left. And if you walk those blood-stained steps today, you might hear it too, the whisper of a child's voice, or the echo of a name, or the sound of someone calling for help. But the camp is silent now, and the world has moved on. We followed the footprints through the snow, and the silence between us grew thicker than the air. You ever notice how some places seem to hum with a memory you can't quite name? The investigator found a rusted key beneath a pile of ash, and it didn't belong to anything we could see. It was like the past had a way of hiding itself in plain sight. Then there was the smell, something sweet and acrid, like burnt sugar mixed with something older. You ever smell a place and feel like it's breathing? The investigator found a hidden chamber beneath the floorboards, and inside was a small, untouched mirror. It reflected not our faces, but something else entirely, something waiting. It was like the place wasn't just holding on to the past, it was living in it, and we were just visitors passing through. You ever wonder what makes a place feel like it's holding its breath? Auschwitz-Birkenau, it's not just the barbed wire or the gas chambers. It's the silence between the screams, the way the wind whispers through the ruins like it's trying to remember something it shouldn't. There's a particular corner of the camp that's been left untouched for decades, a place where the earth still smells like something old and wrong. It's not the bodies, not the ashes, but the air itself, like it's waiting for someone to ask the wrong question. Some say it's the wind, some say it's the memory of the soil. But what if it's something else entirely? What if the earth remembers better than we do? And what if it's been waiting for someone to come back and listen? That's the one thing they can't explain. Not the pain, not the suffering, not the silence. Just this quiet ache in the ground, like it's holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally ask, what happened here? You've heard the names, but have you ever wondered what the locals still say about those steps? Some say the wind carries whispers of names, and if you listen closely, you can hear them echo back. There's a tale about a farmer who once walked those steps at dusk, and when he returned, his boots were stained with something that wasn't dirt. He never spoke of it again. Some believe the steps are cursed, that they hold the weight of every soul that ever passed through. You can feel it like a heavy silence, pressing down just a little too hard. And then there are the children. They say if you're ever lost in the camp, don't run. What? The steps will guide you, though they may lead you to places you never meant to find. Still, people come, not to gawk, but to remember, to honor, to carry the weight of those names, those footsteps, those stories that refuse to be forgotten. There are still questions that no one has been able to answer about Auschwitz-Birkenau. Who was the last person to walk those steps? And what happened to them? Some say the wind carries whispers from the past, but no one has ever been able to hear them clearly. Some say they're too faint, and others say they're not meant to be heard. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't who is lost, but who is still waiting to be found. Somewhere in the silence of the camp, there may be a name that has never been spoken. And maybe, just maybe, the story isn't over. The blood-stained steps are still there, and the silence still lingers. The camp may be silent now, but the questions never are. So, if you're listening, dear friend, what do you think? Is the story over, or is it just beginning? You know, sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones you hear, but the ones you carry in your heart long after the last word is spoken. And sometimes, the quietest places hold the loudest echoes of those who were never heard. Let the story take you where it will, but never forget, the echoes are always listening. Now, let's go deeper. Let's find the truth in the silence. You've heard of places that whisper secrets, places where the silence is louder than the screams. The Hotel del Coronel, perched on the edge of the Pacific, was once a place of luxury. Now, it's a place where the wind carries echoes of something far more sinister. Built in the early 1900s, it was a dream for honeymooners and wealthy travelers. But beneath the grand door, there was something else, a history that didn't want to be forgotten. Over the decades, the stories grew. Some say the hotel was built on the bones of a Native American village. Others say it was cursed by a vengeful spirit. All they know is that the screams still echo at night. Today, the hotel stands empty, a relic of a bygone era. But if you listen closely, you can almost hear it, those forgotten screams, still trapped in the walls, waiting to be remembered. You've heard the rumors, but let me tell you how it all started. The Hotel del Coronel wasn't always a place of whispers and shadows. It was once a place of grandeur, where the rich and the elite came to escape the world. Built in the 1890s by a wealthy industrialist named Thomas Delaney, it was meant to be a retreat for his family and their friends. He hired the best architects and decorators, and the place was filled with marble, velvet, and the sound of laughter. Aliner's death cast a shadow over the hotel, and soon after, the place began to change. The staff started to leave, the guests began to complain of strange noises, and the once lively halls grew eerily quiet. Some say the hotel was cursed the moment Alina died, and that her spirit has been trapped there ever since, waiting for the right moment to be heard again. Others believe she was just the first of many who met a cruel fate in those walls. But the real story of the Hotel del Coronel is still being written. Every room, every hallway, every whisper in the dark holds a piece of the past waiting for someone brave enough to listen. You remember the first time the lights flickered in your room, just as you were falling asleep, and for a moment, it felt like someone was watching from the hallway. The next morning, you found your mirror covered in a thin layer of dust, though you'd left it perfectly clean the night before. One night, you heard a faint scream coming from the elevator, but when you checked, it was locked and the lights were out. Then came the whispers just at the edge of your hearing, like someone was calling your name from the past, trying to tell you something you were too late to hear. You started to wonder if the hotel had a memory of its own, or if it was just trying to remember who it once was. You've heard the stories, but now you're standing in the lobby. The chandelier sways slightly, though no breeze moves the air. A faint, metallic scent lingers like rusted pipes and something older, something wrong. The front desk is empty, but the register clicks softly, as if someone just closed it. A single receipt lies on the counter, its ink smudged like a tear. No one's been here in decades. Upstairs, the elevator is frozen on the 13th floor. The doors are sealed, and the button for that floor is stuck in the down position. You feel it in your bones, something's waiting there. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The room is empty, but the bed is made. A single red rose lies on the pillow, wilting as if it's been there for days. The mirror above the dresser shows a woman's face, but it's not yours. You hear a whisper, not from the walls, but from the air itself. It's not a voice, it's a sound, like someone is breathing in the room with you. And then, a scream. One of the oldest accounts comes from a retired nurse named Margaret, who claimed she heard a woman's voice echoing through the hotel's empty halls in the early 70s. She said it was a sound like a sob caught in the throat, just before a scream. She said the voice was always the same, always on the edge of a scream, never fully breaking through. She tried to report it, but the staff dismissed her as a loner with a troubled mind. He said the figure never looked at him, just kept walking. He didn't go near it. He said it was like looking into a mirror, but the reflection was already gone. And then there was the woman who called the police herself. She said she saw a woman in the lobby, crying, clutching a photograph of a child. She said the woman was there, but when the police arrived, the woman was gone. The police found nothing but a single, crumpled photograph in the trash. It was of a child, and the name on the back was never identified. The woman disappeared that same night, and no one ever saw her again. We began by walking the halls of the Hotel del Coronel, where the air was thick with the scent of old wood and dust. The floorboards groaned beneath our feet like they remembered every step taken before. The staff had told us of a locked room on the 3rd floor that no one could find the key to. We asked around, and the manager's eyes flickered with something between fear and guilt when he mentioned it. Inside, the walls were lined with old photographs of guests, some of them smiling, others with eyes that seemed to follow us. One photo was of a woman in a black dress, her face frozen in a scream that never reached her lips. As we left the room, the lights flickered and the walls seemed to breathe. We all felt a chill that wasn't just from the cold, but from something watching, waiting for us to return. The investigation wasn't over, but we knew we had uncovered something that no one had ever wanted to remember. The hotel had a memory, and it was still waiting to be heard. You know, there's one thing that's never been explained. That one thing that's just floating in the dark. Like a question the hotel never answered. It's not the screams. It's not the missing guests. It's not even the ghost. It's something smaller. Something that's just missing. They say the hotel was built on a forgotten graveyard. But what if the graveyard was the hotel? What if the screams were just the first sound of something waking up? And that's the thing. No one ever asked the right question. No one ever went back far enough. No one ever looked beyond the silence. So now you're here, and you're wondering, what's the one detail that has never been explained? You know, some say the Hotel del Coronel's ghosts aren't just the dead, they're the ones who never left. Like the old maid who ran the front desk, she was known to disappear into the elevator shafts at midnight, and no one ever found her keys. Then there's the story of the young couple who got lost in the maze of hallways, only to be found days later, still clinging to each other, whispering about the walls breathing. Some say the hotel's very foundation is cursed, built on the bones of a forgotten town, and every night, the ground hums with the voices of the displaced. And then there's the most chilling one every year on the anniversary of the hotel's opening. Someone claims to hear the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the halls, but when they go to investigate, the laughter disappears. So, What do you think? Is it the ghosts, or is the hotel just waiting for someone to listen? And yet, the story doesn't end here. The hotel still stands, untouched by time, but with a silence that feels like it's holding its breath. No one knows what really happened that night, and the truth seems to be waiting just beyond the shadows. The local historians say the screams were just a drunken party, but the elderly locals, the ones who grew up near the hotel, tell a different tale. They say the screams were real, and the truth has been buried with the hotel's foundation. Some say the hotel's caretaker, a reclusive man who lives in the basement, has seen things. He won't speak of it, but his eyes tell a story of things that go bump in the night, and things that shouldn't be heard. And so, the mystery remains. A place where the past refuses to stay buried, where the air still hums with the memory of a scream that never faded. What really happened? No one knows, but the hotel does. You know, sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones that scream, but the ones that whisper in the dark. And sometimes, those whispers are still waiting to be heard. I wonder if the Hotel del Coronel's ghosts ever rest, or if they're just waiting for someone to listen. Maybe they're not done telling their story yet. Until then, I'll leave you with the question: what do you hear when the world goes quiet? Good night, and remember, some stories are best told when the lights are low and the shadows are long. You've heard of the sea, but have you ever heard of the silence that follows it? That's what Mont St. Mitchell whispers, a place where the ocean retreats like a ghost at high tide. This is a place where the land and the sea fight for dominance, and the lighthouse stands as a sentinel, watching over both with a kind of weary patience. They say the lighthouse is haunted by those who were lost to the sea, their voices trapped in the stone, waiting for someone to hear them. But the true horror is not in the ghostly whispers, it's in the silence that follows the storm, when the sea has taken everything, and the lighthouse is left alone. You ever wonder how a lighthouse became a place where the sea whispers secrets? Well, Mont St. Mitchell wasn't always a beacon of light. It was once a fortress, a place where the tide itself seemed to hold its breath. In the 11th century, it was built by the Normans, who called it the St. Mitchell, a place of power and protection. But the sea was never far from its walls. It rose and fell with the tides, and with it came stories of drowned sailors and vanished ships. By the 16th century, the fortress had fallen into ruin, and the people of the region began to speak of a ghostly light, a flickering glow that appeared during the stormy nights, guiding ships safely through the treacherous waters. In 1762, the French crown decided to rebuild the fortress as a lighthouse. They called it the Fer de Mont St. Mitchell, and it became one of the most important navigational aids in the region. But even then, the sea still held its secrets. And so, the lighthouse was born, not just as a structure of stone and light, but as a place where the past and present collide, where the sea guards its own mysteries, and where the echoes of the past still linger. You know that feeling when the air just changes? Like the world holds its breath. It was subtle, a hush over the sea, a silence that didn't belong. The keepers started noticing things: tools missing, doors left ajar, a cold that clung to the stones even when the sun was high. It wasn't just the weather anymore. The first keeper to vanish left behind only a trail of damp footprints and a note, half burned, written in a hand that wasn't theirs. It read, "It's not the sea I fear." And now, you're here, not just to see the lighthouse, but to feel the weight of its silence. To wonder if the sea is just a distraction and the real storm is still inside the stone. You ever wonder what happens when a place becomes too much for its own history? Mont St. Mitchell's lighthouse, built in 1847, was meant to guide ships, but it became a grave for something far darker. In 1863, a young woman named Emily Durant vanished from the lighthouse. She was the daughter of the keeper, a quiet, kind girl who had no enemies, no debts, and no reason to run. No one saw her leave, and no one saw her return. The lighthouse keeper, her father, refused to speak of her, and the villagers whispered that she had been taken by the sea, or by something that lives in the dark between the tides. To this day, some say that if you stand at the very top of the lighthouse during a storm, you can hear her voice, a soft, echoing cry, calling for help, calling for light. And if you listen closely, you might just hear her say, "I'm still here. I'm still here." I've spoken to several locals who swear they've seen the lighthouse glow in the dead of night, even when no one's around to watch it. One woman told me she saw a light flicker like a dying star, and then it vanished into the mist, like a ghost retreating into the sea. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Another fisherman claimed he heard the sound of a bell echoing through the rocks, even though the lighthouse has never had a working bell. He said it was the sound of something calling for help, or maybe for someone else. One man, a former lighthouse keeper, told me he once saw a figure in the light tower window staring out at the sea. It wasn't a human shape, more like a shadow with eyes. He said it watched him for a long time, then vanished when he looked away. And then there's the one who swore he saw a child's hand reach out from the rocks at low tide. Not a child, but something else. A presence, a memory, a warning. These are not just stories, dear friends. They're echoes of something that refuses to be forgotten. The lighthouse isn't just a structure, it's a witness, and it's been watching for a very long time. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.